3 men stood in the rain, their silhouettes dark against the storm-streaked Texas sky. Before them, a man knelt in the mud, his hands tied behind his back, blood running down his temple and dissolving into the water. His blue eyes held no fear, only quiet defiance. Sheriff Gage Thornton stepped forward, the long scar on his cheek catching every bolt of lightning. Rain ran from the brim of his hat as he pressed the cold barrel of his pistol to the man's head. "Tell me where she's hiding." His voice was eerily calm. The kneeling man, Cole Marin, looked up through the rain. His black hair was plastered to his head, his clothes torn, but his eyes were steady. "You've lost, Thornton," he said with a weak smile. "Now she knows the truth." Gage's finger tightened on the trigger. "Then you're of no use to me." Thunder boomed overhead, momentarily drowning out the hammer blows. "Last chance, Cole." Cole closed his eyes, the smile never leaving his face. "I kept my promise, Thomas." The gunshot echoed throughout the valley. Weeks earlier, the auction barn stood like a forgotten sentinel at the edge of civilization. Hidden among the pines, far from the main roads of East Texas, it served men who preferred their business away from the watchful eyes of federal law. The year was 1869, 4 years after the Civil War's end, yet in places like this, old habits refused to die. Cole Marin waited in the shadows behind the crowd, tall and still, one shoulder resting against a post, calloused hands tucked into the pockets of a weathered coat. The weight he carried wasn't age but memory, the kind that straightens a man's back until it breaks. The auctioneer's rough voice cut through the damp air, drowning the low murmur of 20 men packed under lantern light. Next, female, 22 years of age, no husband, no kin, sold 3 times before. 2 men dragged a young woman up onto the wagon. The auctioneer banged his stick. "Lot 6, territory stock, $20 start." Someone shouted 10. Laughter. The sheriff stepped forward, the star on his vest glinting dull brass. Gage Thornton had been a colonel once, and the war had left him cruel instead of broken. 15, he said lazily. The girl didn't flinch. Her gaze moved across the ring of faces until it landed on Cole, held, weighed, dismissed. The auctioneer barked again. "Any takers?" Silence stretched. Cole felt the wind shift. Somewhere a whippoorwill called, lonely as regret. He heard his own voice before he decided to speak. 30. The laughter stopped. Coins rang against the barrel. 30 to the Yankee, the auctioneer croaked, then slammed the mallet. Sold. Thornton's grin was slow poison. Well now, Marin's buying himself a ghost. Maybe wants company for those union nightmares. Cole ignored him. He climbed the platform, drew his knife, and cut the chain. The links snapped with a metallic sigh. He dropped them at Thornton's boots. "She's free. She's property," someone muttered. Cole looked up. Not anymore. He turned away, motioning the girl to follow. For a heartbeat, she didn't move. Then, without looking at him, she stepped off the wagon and walked into the dark. They rode double on his bay through pine shadows until the road dissolved into pasture. The moon was high by the time they reached an abandoned homestead, barn leaning, well half choked with vines. Crickets sang from the tall grass. Cole dismounted, tied the reins, struck a match, and held it over the stone rim. Water shimmered faint and deep. "Still good," he murmured. He faced her. "You can drink. No one here'll stop you." She didn't move. Only the wind stirred the ragged hem of her dress. He cut the rope from her wrists. She stumbled, caught herself on the cold stones, then turned as he steadied her. The closeness startled them both. Her eyes were fierce, searching his face as if for the trap. "You paid for me," she said, voice low, accented but steady. "What do you want?" He released her arm. "Nothing. Men don't pay for nothing." "Then I'm not most men." "You're a fool." "Been called worse." She stepped back, the moonlight drawing silver on her skin. "If I run, you shoot? If you run, you run. And if I stay, then stay." He nodded toward the barn. "It's dry." She studied him one breath longer, then crossed the yard without another word. The door creaked and shut. Cole exhaled, sat on the well's edge, and listened to the wind sigh through empty stalls. He stayed there until the stars blurred. When morning came, fog lay thick over the grass like spilled milk. She was already outside, kneeling by the ashes of a long-dead fire, rubbing flint she must have found in the barn. He poured coffee into a tin cup and set it near her without comment. She waited until he walked off to drink it. By noon, she'd mended the corral gate using strips of rawhide. By dusk, she'd cleaned the trough. He watched from the porch, amused despite himself. "You fixing to own the place?" he asked. "I fix what's broken. World's full of it. Then you'll never run out of work." Her English carried the dry rhythm of someone who learned it from soldiers and traders. Later, when the sun dropped red behind the trees, he found her at the well again, studying her reflection. "You got a name?" he asked. "Ayana." "Means what?" "It means I remember." She looked at him through the fading light. "Do you?" He didn't answer. That night, thunder rolled from the west. The first storm of summer came hard, drumming the roof like rifle fire. Cole dreamed of fire instead of rain, of villages burning, of cries that language couldn't soften. He woke choking on the ghost of smoke. The door opened quietly. Ayana stood there, wrapped in a blanket, eyes sharp. "You make noise like dying," she said. "Dreams. Dreams are for the living." She set his pistol on the table. "Next time you wake, use this on yourself, not me." Before he could speak, she was gone, footsteps swallowed by the rain. In the morning, he found her outside cleaning the pistol, hands steady. "You shouldn't touch that," he said. "You shouldn't talk in your sleep." "Fair." He took a seat on the step, rubbing the scar that cut across his palm. "You ever shoot?" "My people used bows. We didn't need noise to kill. Different kind of war. Yours or mine?" He didn't answer. Instead, he handed her the weapon. "Show me." She raised it, sighted down the barrel, squeezed. The bottle on the fence post shattered. "Guess we ain't so different," he said. "You still the fool who paid $30, she replied, but there was the ghost of a smile in it. Days turned into a rhythm neither admitted was peace. She worked the garden, fed the horses, repaired what time had ruined. He rode the fence lines, checked traps, returned with rabbits for supper. Their words were few, but the silence grew gentler. Once she found him staring at a faded photograph, two men in uniform, one dark-haired, both younger than memory could stand. "Who?" she asked. "Friends," he said. "Used to be." She touched the edge of the photo. "Used to be is what the dead say." He closed the case. "Then I've been dead a while." That evening, while he was in the pasture, she wandered into the cabin and saw his field journal lying open. The sketches stopped her heart, burned lodges, bodies curled like question marks, the pencil notes precise and cold. Beneath one drawing, a single line. Nietzsche Creek, orders from Captain G. Thornton, objective complete. When Cole returned, she was waiting on the porch, the book in her hands. "This place," she said. "It was my mother's camp." He froze. Rain began again, soft this time. "I didn't know." "You drew it." "Because I was there." "You burned it." "Because I obeyed." Her voice broke only once. "Obeyed who?" "Men who thought maps were cleaner than mercy." She hurled the book at his chest. "You think $30 makes us even?" "No." "Then what?" "Then maybe I start paying back." She laughed once, bitter as gun oil. "You can't buy forgiveness." "I'm not trying to." He set the book on the step. "I'm trying to stop owing." She turned away, shoulders trembling though her voice stayed cold. "The wind remembers, even if you don't." She disappeared into the barn. He stood in the rain until his coat clung like guilt. When lightning flared, he looked at the well and saw his reflection beside hers from earlier, two ghosts circling the same hole. Somewhere behind the clouds, a new storm gathered, one that wouldn't stop at rain. Cole didn't see her the next morning until the sun had climbed high enough to burn the mist off the fields. She was out by the tree line, her figure small against the pines, moving like part of the landscape itself. When he approached, she was setting snares, deft with her hands, every motion quiet and exact. "You hunt?" he asked. She didn't turn. "I live." "There's a difference." "Not here." He watched her finish, the noose of thin wire glinting faintly in the light. "You planning on staying long enough to need more than breakfast?" She stood and met his gaze. "You didn't ask me to leave." "Didn't seem my choice." "Nothing is, for you." That stung more than he expected. He looked past her, toward the smoke rising from Hollow Creek in the distance, where Thornton's badge still flashed its false shine. "Maybe that's true." "You fear him," she said. "No," he answered, too quickly. "I fear becoming him." She considered that, then brushed past him toward the house. "Then you should stop looking over your shoulder and start looking ahead." The words followed him through the day like a prayer that wasn't meant to save anyone. He rode into the nearby ridge that afternoon, checking the traps he'd set along the creek, mind circling the same memory. Her village burning, his own orders echoing through the night. The cries had never left him. When he returned, the cabin smelled of stew, meat, and wild herbs. She stood by the fire, stirring without glancing up. "Found rabbits," she said. "Guess you found dinner too. You left your rifle in the barn." "Didn't figure you'd shoot me with my own gun." "Not yet." It was half a jest, half something else. They ate in silence, save for the pop of the fire and the wind brushing against the boards. Afterward, she asked, "You ever think why you followed them? The ones who burned?" "Because I believed I was right. And now I believe I was a coward." "Good," she said softly. "That means you're still human." He smiled without humor. "Don't sound like forgiveness." It isn't. The next days blurred into uneasy rhythm again. They rebuilt fences, cleared vines from the well, repaired shutters. Sometimes they spoke, sometimes not. One evening she found him sanding the stock of his rifle. "Your hands know how to fix what they broke," she said. "Maybe that's all they know." Then teach them something else. She tossed him a small piece of wood, her unfinished story stick, carved with symbols like tears. Make one for you. Don't know the language. Then learn it. She showed him a mark. This means war. She drew another. This means storm. Then a third, her eyes glinting. This means maybe. He traced it with his thumb. What's maybe mean? It means the story isn't done yet. For the first time, he laughed, a dry, surprised sound that startled them both. That night, he couldn't sleep. He sat by the well, tracing the carvings she'd taught him into the handle of his knife, a small act of memory against the dark. The stars shimmered faintly in the water below, broken by ripples of wind. He thought of what she'd said. The wind remembers. Maybe it did. Maybe it whispered every sin to whoever still cared to listen. When dawn came, she joined him without a word, 2 tin cups between them, steam rising into the cold air. You ever wonder, he said, why the ones who survive feel more haunted than the ones who don't? Because we remember, she answered. And remembering is harder than dying. He nodded. Then maybe that's what we've got in common. Not enough, she said, but her tone had softened. He reached for the coffee pot, poured for her first. You think the sheriff will let it go? Men like that don't stop until the fire runs out of wood. Then we'd best stop giving him kindling. She met his eyes, steady now, the distrust tempered by something that looked almost like purpose. You said you're tired of easy, she said. Then what's next? He looked toward the horizon, where the clouds were bruised with another storm. Maybe the hard thing, he said. Maybe the right one. The air between them shifted, not peace, not yet, but the beginning of one. Behind them, the hollow whispered, and in its breath they both heard the same thing. A debt that hadn't finished collecting. That night, as he checked his rifle and she sat mending her torn dress, thunder murmured again in the distance. He said quietly, almost to himself, if he comes, I won't run. She didn't look up. Then you'll die. Maybe, maybe not, she said. If I shoot first. Her eyes met his across the dim light, 2 ghosts daring the future to come closer. Outside, the wind turned colder, carrying the scent of smoke from somewhere too near to be coincidence. The smoke wasn't from any far-off lightning strike. It carried the greasy tang of pitch, man-made and deliberate. Cole rose from the step, instincts hardening, and crossed the yard to where the horses shifted uneasily. Ayanna followed without being told, eyes scanning the tree line. Riders, she murmured. 3, maybe 4. Cole could hear them too now, the rhythm of hoofbeats disguised under the wind. He motioned her toward the barn and slipped into the shadows by the corral fence. Moments later, the riders appeared, their silhouettes forming in the gloom like ghosts that had learned to ride. Thornton's men, by the look of their tattered gray coats and mismatched revolvers. The lead rider, a big man with a hawk nose, dismounted, grinning at the sight of the horses tied by the well. Told you Marin was dumb enough to hole up here. His companion spat. Sheriff said bring back proof he's alive, or dead. Cole didn't wait to hear which they preferred. He stepped from the shadows and leveled his rifle. Proof's expensive tonight. The shot cracked through the mist, dropping the hawk-nosed man before his grin could fade. The others scattered for cover, pistols flaring orange in the dark. Bullets smacked against the stone rim of the well, showering sparks. Ayanna emerged from the barn, her small derringer steady in her hand. She fired once, and one of the riders yelped, tumbling from his saddle. Cole fired again, clean, efficient, until the last horse bolted into the trees. Silence fell, except for the ringing in his ears and the faint whimper of the wounded man crawling through the grass. Ayanna walked to him, her face unreadable in the faint light. "Who sent you?" she demanded. The man coughed blood, sneering. "Sheriff says you're his $30 whore and he's coming to collect." She didn't flinch, but her hand tightened on the pistol. Cole stepped between them. "He's done talking." The wounded man's eyes widened just before Cole's shadow fell across him. When it was over, Ayanna turned away, her jaw set. "You shouldn't have stopped me." "Didn't do it for him." "Then for who?" "For you." "Killing's easy. Living with it isn't." She looked at him for a long moment. "You think I don't already live with it?" She holstered the Derringer and walked back toward the barn. Cole dragged the bodies to the far side of the pasture, burying them shallow beneath wet earth. The work was slow, but it steadied him, the rhythm of the shovel, the weight of each shovelful of soil falling like muted thunder. By the time he was done, dawn had begun to pale the horizon. When he returned to the cabin, Ayanna was sitting by the well, her blanket drawn tight around her shoulders. "They'll send more," she said quietly. "He wants what you have. Maybe he just wants to see if he can still own something." "You," she said. "Or me. Both, maybe." She turned toward the eastern sky where thin light crept between the clouds. "Then we stop running." "You mean fight?" "I mean choose where to stand when they come." He studied her profile in the half-light, proud, scar catching the sunrise like a blade. "You really want to die here, on ground that isn't yours?" "Ground doesn't belong to anyone who bleeds on it," she said. "That makes it ours now." He almost smiled. "You sound like a soldier." "No," she said. "I sound like someone tired of being hunted." The wind shifted, carrying the smell of rain and gunpowder eastward. Cole felt the ache in his shoulders, the dull throb of the old wound that never fully healed. "There's a network west of here," he said finally. "Free men and scouts, people still chasing what the war promised but never gave. They trade news, hide people, smuggle evidence. A friend runs part of it near Cypress Crossing." "Evidence of what?" "What Thornton did during the war. What he's still doing now. I've got proof. It's why he wants me dead. And you waited till now to tell me? Didn't figure you'd believe me." "I don't," she said flatly, "but I want to see it." He hesitated, then nodded. "Tomorrow, I'll show you." They fell silent. Overhead, clouds thickened, and the first drops of rain began to patter against the stones. Ayanna rose. "You can bury bodies," she said, "but not what they stand for." "Then what do you stand for?" "For those who can't anymore." Her words lingered like the storm's scent, heavy and electric. Inside, Cole poured whiskey into 2 tin cups and handed one to her. "To the dead," he said. "To the living," she corrected. They drank, not as allies yet, but as 2 debts that hadn't been paid. Later, when she slept in the corner by the cold hearth, Cole sat awake at the table, unfolding the worn pages of his journal. The sketches seemed to breathe in the lamplight, faces, names, orders written in a neat hand that now trembled. At the back, a single folded sheet marked with coordinates. He touched the spot, then closed the book. Outside, the thunder rolled again, closer this time. He whispered to no one, "Tomorrow, we dig." Ayanna stirred but didn't wake. She murmured something in her tongue, a prayer or a curse, and the rain answered against the roof. Somewhere beyond Hollow Creek, Gage Thornton poured himself another drink and smiled into the mirror, unaware that the war he thought he'd already won had just begun again. The storm broke over the plains, drumming its verdict on every roof and grave between them. In its thunder, Cole Marin heard a truth older than justice. Mercy, once paid for in blood, never comes cheap. The rain eased near dawn, leaving the air raw and clean. Smoke curled from the barn roof where the lightning had struck somewhere in the night, not enough to burn, just enough to scar the shingles like a warning. Cole stepped outside barefoot, mud clinging to his trousers, and looked toward the well. The water shimmered faint gray, smooth except where a raindrop disturbed it. Ayanna was already there, shawl wrapped tight, holding his field journal. She had wrapped it in oilcloth. "You going to keep drawing ghosts?" she asked. "Thought maybe I'd stop giving them faces. Then what do you do with the rest?" He took the book from her, heavy with the weight of pages and memory. "Bury it." Together they dug by the well, the earth soft from the rain. He set the journal in the shallow pit, covered it, pressed the mud flat with the back of his spade. "That doesn't erase it," she said quietly. "No," he agreed. "But maybe it stops it from following me every time I close my eyes." She crouched beside the mound. "My people say the ground keeps secrets until the wind is ready to tell them again." "You trust the wind more than people?" "Always." He smiled faintly. "Then maybe I will too." She rose, stretching the stiffness from her limbs. "We'll need to leave before the next storm. Thornton won't stop. Neither will the wind." The faintest trace of dawn colored the horizon, a pale seam of gold breaking through the clouds. Cole leaned against the well's stone rim, looking east. "When I bought you back there," he said, "I wasn't thinking. Maybe I was trying to buy something that don't exist anymore. Mercy? Peace? You can't buy that either," she said. "You can only earn it." "And how do I start?" "Stop paying for it," she answered. "Start living like you already owe it." He let that sit a long time. The wind shifted again, lifting strands of her dark hair across her face. For the first time, she didn't move away when he brushed them aside. "The storm's heading north," she said. "So are we." "You sure?" "No." "Then maybe that's reason enough." She glanced back at the spot where the journal lay buried. "The ground will remember you," she said. "The question is how." He tightened the saddle straps and mounted, offering her a hand up behind him. She hesitated only a breath, then took it. The horse started forward, hooves squelching through the mud. Behind them, the wind stirred the dirt atop the shallow grave, scattering it like ash. The world smelled of wet earth, spent gunpowder, and something cleaner, like the first second after forgiveness, before you realize it won't last. Cole didn't look back. Ahead lay a trail he hadn't ridden in years, and a reckoning that would finally force him to. Ayanna closed her eyes and whispered something in her language. He didn't ask what it meant. He just let the sound of it settle between them like a promise neither of them could keep yet. As they rode toward the light, the hollow disappeared behind the trees, swallowed by mist. Only the well remained, silent, keeping its secrets. 2 days after the storm-washed departure from Hollow Creek, they reached the ridge above Cole's ranch, the fields lying in their old, rough geometry like scars someone had tried to forget to trace. The cabin lifted from the grass with its patched roof and blind windows. and the stone well weighted like a small, round truth you couldn't argue with. Ayanna said nothing as they rode in because names didn't change what a place remembered, and this place remembered more than either of them wanted to say aloud. The wind carried the resin sour of pines and the clean bite of creek water and, faintly, the memory of gunpowder you could almost convince yourself was only the ghost of last week's trouble. Cole swung down first, checked the paddock boards with a palm, and spoke of practical things: grain left in the bin, a hinge that needed oil, the mare's bad habit of testing the lower rail, because practical talk was how a man kept the wolves of memory on the far side of the door. Ayanna slipped off the bay and went straight to the trough, drew water with the bucket's iron throat clacking wet against the stone rim, drank, wiped her mouth with her wrist, then set about finding what in the yard was broken and could be fixed, as if she carried a private inventory of damage in her breath. The first day she moved like a shadow that didn't trust its own feet. She mended the coop with wire scavenged from a broken trap. She re-roped the corral gate with rawhide. She brought order to the shed that had not known a woman's hands in years. She never asked where to find things and never commented on what she found, and if she noticed the tin of cartridges hidden behind the old tin plate or the hair ribbon tucked into the rafters above the workbench, she folded the noticing into that same quiet where she kept her past. That night, while crickets stitched their whisper across the field and the stars laid out the old blank ledger no man could fill, Cole lay on his back and watched the rafters and listened to the rain that wasn't falling, and still somehow he heard it. When sleep took him, it did so with the heaviness of water, and he saw fire that fell like rain, and he heard a woman scream in a language he didn't know and still understood, and he woke with the taste of ashes in his teeth, breath shuddering like a skittish colt. He found Ayanna in the doorway, her hair a dark river around her shoulders, and for once she did not bring the pistol. She just looked at him with a weariness he recognized the way a soldier recognizes the shape of a rifle under a blanket, and she said, "You talk to ghosts like you owe them money." And he said, "I do." And she said, "Then pay them with deeds, not breath," and left him with the lamp's thin light shaking on the table like a single note that couldn't find its next. In the morning, Ayanna moved through the cabin like someone mapping a ruin. She opened the tall, narrow cupboard, found 2 chipped plates, a pewter wedding cup dull with a film of years, a scrap of blue cloth that had once been ribbon and now was the color of old sky. On the mantel sat an oval frame with its glass turned toward the wall. Cole saw her fingers hover, and after a moment he crossed, turned the frame back, and there they were, the woman with the strong mouth and the smiling eyes, the little girl with the looped braids and the stubborn chin, Elizabeth and Clara, the names he didn't say often because speaking them was like lifting a heavy box you already knew was empty. Ayanna's face didn't change, but her breath did, a small caught thing, the way breath changes when a hawk's shadow passes. "They were yours," she said, not quite a question, and Cole nodded, and she said, "Gone how long?" And he said, 6 winters, and she said, "Then the house has had time to learn how to be lonely," and he could not help the small laugh that escaped him, the first sound he'd made that week that wasn't apology or instruction. Work kept the ghosts at the fence line for a while. He fixed the ridge cap. She took the garden back from the weeds. He rebuilt a step. She found a straight branch and carved the story marks she'd promised to teach him, drawing with a knife the small alphabet of storms and roads and choices, and in the late light she taught him the difference between a line that meant loss and a line that meant debt, and he said, "They look the same." And she said, "Not if you've paid one." And he looked at her and thought of all the things he had not yet paid. That afternoon, they rode the lower pasture to check for breaks where hogs might root under. The sky wore that March blue that looks honest from a distance and mean up close, and the wind showed its teeth now and then. When they crested the knoll, Cole saw a dust smear on the road toward town and didn't say anything because there are some kinds of weather a man doesn't announce. He just angled the mare toward the cottonwoods and cut a shorter path home. By the time they unsaddled, the dust had gathered itself into the small separate storms of 3 riders who knew the place well enough not to hurry, and Ayanna stood by the well and watched the line of them approach, with her head slightly tilted as if listening not for hoofbeats, but for intent. Gage Thornton was not among them. That would have been too kind or too foolish, depending on your belief in justice. Instead, he sent 2 deputies and a rancher who had traded his conscience for a steady wage and 3 fingers of whiskey whenever the bottle passed. The lead deputy, a wide-shouldered man with a white scar like a handshake down his cheek, swung off his horse and stood with his thumbs in his belt as if to say the law rested easy when he was around. "Afternoon, Marin," he said. "You look well for a man who purchases other men's property." Cole kept his hands loose at his sides. Ayanna did not move at all. "Afternoon," Cole said. "You looking to sell me some law?" "Sheriff's compliment," the man said, and set something on the fence post, a single brass cartridge that caught the sun and lit a small fire in the air. "Says he's kindly reminding you the county appreciates obedience." "I remember obedience," Cole said. "Didn't do the county much good last time." The deputy shrugged. "We ain't here for philosophy. Name of an Apache girl brought through Hollow 2 weeks back. Ayanna. Sheriff says that's stolen property. He wants it back." Cole felt the old cold roll through him, the kind that starts at the base of the skull and works downward until even your shadow shivers. He didn't look at her, because looking would have been a weapon the deputy could use. Instead, he said, very slowly, "There's no stolen property on this land." And the deputy said, "Could be we take a look to be sure." And Ayanna said, in a voice that surprised even Cole, low and flat as a creek in drought, "You ain't fit to look at chickens." The second deputy laughed, quick and mean. The rancher didn't, because he was looking at the well the way a man looks at the edge of a cliff he's trying to convince himself is a road. "We'll be back, Marin," the lead man said, picking up the cartridge and slipping it into his vest like a promise he intended to keep. "Sheriff likes his debts paid in person." They turned their horses and rode off without haste, which told Cole everything he needed about the speed of the trouble coming. They watched the dust tailing away until it thinned and fell, and only then did Cole let himself breathe the way he'd been taught to in the belly of gunsmoke, slow, through the back of the throat, so the lungs remembered they were not just for shouting. "He'll come at dusk," he said. "He did before." "Then we use the light," Ayanna said. She went to the barn and returned with the rifle she'd cleaned the night before and the little derringer tucked under her sash like a hidden truth. He thought of telling her to hide, to take the creek bed south and let him distract the storm, and he did not say it because he had learned something in the last week. A woman who had already lost her home did not need a man to offer her a new place to be absent from. Instead, he said, "There's something I haven't shown you." And she said, "Then show me now." And he led her past the paddock to the stand of oaks that clung like old men to the slope above the creek, to the tree with the lightning scar that had driven sap into a frozen tear down the trunk years ago, and at its base he knelt and lifted a flat stone and dug with his hands the last 2 inches of memory until the little tin box came free, edges rust-crumbed, lid wired shut the way you wire a gate when you know bad cattle learn fast. He didn't open it. He set it on the root and sat back on his heels like a man waiting for a sentence. "What is it?" she asked, and he said, "Proof." And she said, "Of what?" And he said, "That the men who told me where to point my rifle were pointing at coin, not flags." And he told her in a quiet voice about requisition lists turned to personal ledgers, about supply wagons that veered a little off the map and arrived lighter than they'd left, about a judge back east with a soldier's heart on his sleeve and a banker's fingers in a safe, about Gage Thornton, the colonel who learned the sheriff's badge weighed less than guilt and therefore was easier to wear. He told her about names and dates and shipments and a captain's order written in a careful hand that declared a village an objective and then declared the objective complete. He did not apologize because apology was the cheapest coin in the world and he had spent too much of that already, but he did not excuse either. He just laid the sky at her feet and asked whether the weather looked any different to her. She squatted beside the root, touched the tin with a knuckle as if testing a kettle. "You kept it," she said, and he said, "I hid it." And she said, "Same thing if you still have hands." And he said nothing because she was right. "Why bring me here?" she asked after a moment, and he said, "Because if I get cut down in the yard at dusk, I don't want him digging under this tree with his good boots." And she said, "You think I am a courier for your conscience?" And he said, "No." And for the first time he met her eyes in that place and did not try to be anything except tired. "I think you are the one person who will decide what this is for if I can't," he said. "Because you have more to lose and less to forgive." The wind moved through the oak leaves with a sound like paper on a courthouse table, and in it, Ayanna heard the old names her mother had taught her to whisper to the dawn, names for stones and names for debts, and names for the way a road looks just before it turns into a trap. She took the tin box in both hands, weighed it, then set it back on the root with care. "If this is truth," she said, "then it is dangerous." And he said, "Truth always is." And she said, "Then why we still here?" And he said, "Because sometimes the house a ghost haunts is the only roof that keeps the rain off." And she almost smiled and said, "Then let's teach the ghost to fight." They carried the tin back to the cabin as the sun leaned west, and Cole wrapped it in a feed sack and tucked it beneath a loose board under the bed, and Ayanna placed the pewter cup over the seam as if to mark the spot with a small, private ritual the dead might appreciate. She moved about the room with the calm of someone who did her thinking with her sleeves rolled, cutting strips of cloth for bandages, placing a kettle near the coals, checking the shutters for gaps that would shine like targets when lamplight fell. Cole cleaned the rifle again, though it did not need cleaning, laid out cartridges in a row like little prayers, poured water into 2 cups and drank one and set the other on the sill because superstition tastes like water when the mouth runs dry. Dusk came on quick, the way it does when somebody's thinking of you, and with it came the hush that says something is listening. The first hoofbeats reached them under the cricket noise, then the second, then the little pause that means a man has raised a hand, and then the slow approach you do when you want eyes to remember how tall you sat your horse. Thornton did not knock. He didn't have to. The men who run fires don't ask permission from doors. He called from the yard, smooth as oil on a Sunday boot. "Evening, Marin." Brought a neighbor's concern and the county's authority, which is, as you know, more or less the same thing. And Cole said through the closed door, "You brought more than 2 dogs this time, Gage?" And the chuckle came warm and empty, just enough to carry what needs carrying, and then the small, ragged silence that follows a lie. Ayanna stood beside the window, body angled to the jamb, watching the yard through the narrow slice she'd left when she shifted the shutter. Thornton sat easy in the saddle, his hat's brim making a false horizon over eyes that had learned too much in the wrong schools. Beside him, two deputies different from the morning pair, and a fourth man with the wild dog lean of someone who liked to be paid in pain. Behind them, a fifth figure lingered in the dusk like a roomer, thin, hunched, holding a notebook instead of a rifle. "We'll search the premises," Thornton said, not raising his voice, "and I'll see to the paperwork after. I have faith in you, Marin, the way a man has faith in a creek crossing where he's never seen a horse drown." And Cole said, "You bring a warrant written in anything besides your breath?" And Thornton said, "Times are hard. Ink is dear." And the fourth man laughed, and Ayanna said, "How many of your own names are in that book, Sheriff?" And the one with the notebook flinched a little like a candle. It would have gone hard and simple then, a door kicked and a bullet's small lesson, except that Cole did something neither side expected. He stepped out with his hands away from his belt and said, "You want to look? Look." And the deputies glanced at each other and then at Thornton, and Thornton smiled that slow, bad smile and nodded like a preacher allowing a song. As they swung down, Cole said, quietly enough the yard did not carry it, "You won't find anything in there except my ghosts." And Ayanna opened the door and stood where the lamplight drew her shape in the gap, and every man in the yard learned something about her silence he had not known to be afraid of until then. They searched because wicked men like ceremony and because the shape of power matters even when the power is thin. They pawed through drawers, lifted the mattress, peered into the stove as if truth might curl there like a bread smell. The wild dog man prodded the mantel frame and turned the picture face down again, and Ayanna turned it back without looking at him, and he looked away first. The thin man with the notebook wrote as if the writing itself were the deed, and the deputies were the ink. Thornton didn't dismount. He watched the room through the doorway, the way a man watches a dog he's half trained and half afraid to hit. When they were done, and they were always done before they started, Thornton tipped his hat and said, "The county thanks you. Marin, it's rare to meet a citizen who understands the virtue of transparency." And Cole said, "You don't see through a river by stirring it." And Thornton said, "I see enough." And he wasn't lying about that. Then he placed something on the porch rail, not a bullet this time, but a small square of folded paper with a red thread knotted through one corner, and said, "A summons, of sorts. Bring the girl to the office tomorrow, and we'll sort the matter like gentlemen." And Ayanna said, "I haven't seen a gentleman since the world started." And Thornton's smile narrowed, and he said, "I'm patient, Ayanna. The law is patient. Hunger is patient." And then he turned his horse, and his men turned theirs, and the dust wrote their names for a minute and then forgot how to spell. Night fell clean and sharp. The cabin breathed like a living thing around them. Cole picked up the folded paper and opened it. Inside was a single line in a tidy hand he recognized from orders long ago. "Judge H. rides to county in 4 days." The red thread was a small, quiet trumpet. It meant a trial if you had no evidence and a hanging if you did. Ayanna touched the thread and said, "Your judge?" And Cole said, "Not mine." And she said, "Yours to answer for." And he did not argue. The lamp burned low. Outside, a whippoorwill started its long, mournful arithmetic. Cole poured coffee gone bitter and cold and drank it anyway. "He'll come sooner than he said," Ayanna murmured. "Men who speak slow with their tongues tend to hurry with their hands." "I know," Cole said. He looked at the loose board under the bed, then at the mantel where the picture sat upright again, then back at Ayanna. "We leave before dawn." "Where?" "The oak in the canyon," he said. "There's more than that tin. A note I didn't understand 10 years ago might mean something now." She nodded, simple, as if he'd told her the weather. Then she took up the story stick and added a new mark, 2 lines crossing a third with the lightest pressure of the knife. "What's that one?" he asked. "House of Ghosts," she said. "It means we sleep with our eyes open." He nodded, and for the first time that day, his chest loosened enough to let air in without bargaining. Outside, the wind changed and brought with it the faintest flavor of distant rain and the metallic breath of a town sharpening its knives. Inside, they banked the coals to a red hush and lay down, both dressed, boots near, rifles closer, the loose board under them, a thin wooden horizon between past and present. For a while the house made night noises, the tick of wood, the soft scuffling of a mouse that was too smart to be trapped, and then even those sounds agreed to be quiet. When sleep took them, it did so the way a promise does when both people mean it. Carefully, without sudden moves. By dawn, the promise broke like all others, quietly, without apology. Ayanna woke first. The air held that thin, metallic chill that comes before rain or violence, and the horses were restless, shifting in their stalls. She rose, checked the rifle, and went to the door. The world outside was gray, the kind of light that makes everything look like a memory. Cole was already saddling the bay, the bedroll lashed tight. "You sleep?" she asked. "Didn't try," he said. They rode out without breakfast, following the creek south through fog that hung in the trees like smoke from an old fire. Neither spoke for a long while. Every hoofbeat seemed to echo too long. When they reached the canyon mouth, the wind changed. A hawk wheeled above, crying in a voice that could have belonged to any god who'd ever watched men lose their way. Cole dismounted where the rock opened into a shallow shelf and pointed to a blackened oak half toppled by lightning years before. "Here," he said. He knelt, brushing away the loose soil. Beneath the roots lay a rusted shovel, and below that, the edge of a metal box, older than the war, lid sealed with pitch. They dug in silence until it came free. Cole pried the lid open with his knife. Inside were packets of folded papers wrapped in oilskin, a brass compass, and a letter so worn the creases looked like scars. Ayanna unfolded it carefully. The handwriting inside was delicate, almost beautiful, but the words were cold. A list of supply routes, dates, signatures, names of men who'd turned blood into currency. Near the bottom she found G. Thornton and, below that, Hargrove. "The judge," she said. "And your colonel." Cole nodded. "Proof of what we were ordered to do." "And what you obeyed," she said. He didn't deny it. "I kept it to bury him with," he said. "Now maybe it buries us instead." Ayanna stared at the papers, her fingers trembling though her eyes were steady. "My mother used to say the earth keeps every secret until someone's brave enough to dig it up. Guess we're brave or stupid. Same thing if you live through it." They burned a small fire in the hollow behind the rocks, dried the edges of the damp papers, and sealed them again. Cole drew a rough map in the dirt. "There's a network east. Freeman's people. Used to move escaped soldiers and freedmen out of bad counties. They'll know what to do with this." "Then we ride there." "Not yet," he said. "Thornton's watching every road. We need to draw him off first." "How?" "By letting him think I ran." She shook her head. "He'll follow both of us. Not if you're leading. You think I'll run easier because I'm Apache?" "Because you can disappear better than me," he said. "Because the land still remembers you." She looked at him long, measuring whether he meant it. "And you?" "I'll give him something to chase." "You'll die," Maybe, he said, but not before he believes you're gone. She kicked dirt over the fire. Then we'd better make it look good. They packed the papers, sealed the tin, and rode north by a hidden trail that twisted through the mesquite and limestone, their horses brushing dew from the tall grass until both riders were soaked. By mid-morning they reached a fork in the creek where the water ran clear and fast. Cole stopped, scanning the ridges. "We split here," he said. "You take the east branch. There's an old mission ruin near Cypress Crossing. Freeman's people meet there sometimes. And you?" "I'll ride west. Let them see my trail." She dismounted, angry now. "That wasn't the plan." "Plans change." "You sound like him," she said. "Thornton." He winced. "That's why I'm trying to finish this." The argument died in the silence between them. She tied her saddlebag tighter, then reached into her pocket and pulled out the story stick, the small piece of carved wood she'd been working since Hollow Creek. "Here," she said. "For luck?" "No," she said. "So you remember what you still owe?" He took it and didn't look at her. "If I don't come back, then I'll tell the wind to find you," she said. She swung into the saddle, met his eyes once more, and then she was gone, riding into the pale morning until the fog swallowed her. Cole watched until there was nothing left but the echo of hooves, then turned his horse west. The day stretched slow and merciless. Twice he saw riders behind him, scouts from Thornton's posse, and each time he led them further into the Badlands, shooting once, always missing just enough to keep them chasing. By dusk, his horse was lathered and trembling. He found shelter in a wash where the rocks made a shallow cave. He fed the bay what grass he could pull from the slope and drank creek water that tasted of iron. He slept in snatches, rifle across his knees. In the dark, dreams came again. Firelight, screams, the smell of burning hair. He woke before dawn, shivering in the chill. Far off, gunfire cracked, single, then double. He counted the echoes. 2 miles east. Ayanna's trail. He was moving before thought caught up. The sun broke through in knives of gold as he rode hard toward the sound, heart hammering faster than the hooves. When he reached the ridge above the creek, he saw the smoke first, thin but rising. At the base of the slope lay a dead horse, its saddle torn. He found a scrap of Ayanna's shawl caught in the brush, and his blood went cold. Then a voice, hoarse but human, called his name from below. He slid down the bank and found a woman propped against the rocks, skin dark, eyes bright with fever. Martha Freeman. "You Marin?" She gasped. "She sent me." "Ayanna?" "Alive," Martha coughed. "They caught her once, slipped free. Told me to run, tell you. Said to trust the river. It still runs east." He gave her water. "Who's after her?" "Thornton. And Harrow's men. He's come down from Austin, judge with his own gallows." She laughed weakly. "Your list must be worth more than gold. Where is she now?" "Heading to Liberty. Said something about a telegraph." "Damn." He pressed a hand to her wound. It was deep, the kind no doctor could fix this far out. "Rest," he said. "I'll find her." "You'd better," she whispered. "Because she's the only one left who still believes you." She smiled then, small and fierce, and the breath left her like smoke leaving a chimney. Cole sat beside her a long moment, hat in hand. When he finally rose, the sun was full and merciless. He covered her with his coat, whispered the only prayer he knew, and mounted up. He rode east along the river, following the broken signs of her passage, the bent reeds, the faint prints of a horse shod unevenly. Hours passed. Once he saw dust ahead, but when he reached it, there was nothing, only the prints of 3 horses, not one. Thornton's men. He followed until twilight. The trail dipped into a shallow canyon where the air smelled of ash. There he found the remains of a small fire, still warm, and beside it, the empty tin of oil he'd used to seal the list. She'd been here, and she'd moved on. He built no fire that night, just watched the sky turn from gold to bruised purple and thought of the words she'd said. Stop paying for it. Start living like you already owe it. In the dark, he whispered her name to the wind, and the wind, as always, said nothing back. By the time the sun reached its cruelest height, Ayanna had crossed 2 ridges and half a river, and the trail behind her bled like a wound she refused to look at. The paint mare Martha had thrust into her hands the day before moved with that narrow-chested economy of a plains horse that has learned to keep breath for when it matters, ears flicking toward every whisper the land made, and Ayanna kept one hand on the reins and the other near the rifle balanced against her knee, feeling each hoofbeat as a borrowed heartbeat she might have to pay back with interest. Liberty lay somewhere east, a promise written in heat haze and thin cloud, but the country between here and there was a ledger of ghosts and debts, gully-cut and oak-bitten, creek-scored and wind-scolded, and every bend offered a place a man could wait with his patience and his gun. Near mid-afternoon, she turned off the wagon trace and followed a deer path down to a bar of pale gravel where the river split around a fallen cottonwood, let the mare drink, then waded knee-deep on the upstream side to wash sign, cold water stinging like a reprimand, the current tugging at her dress as if it wanted to keep what little warmth she had left. The sky darkened by inches, as if someone were drawing a hand over the sun, and when she climbed the far bank, her clothes steamed, and the mare blew hard, and the prairie opened in a long sigh of grass and scattered live oaks, each tree holding its own small shadow like a secret. She found shelter under a low bluff where limestone roofed a pocket of dirt, swept clean by old storms, and ate a strip of jerky so tough it made her jaw ache, chased it with creek water that tasted of iron and leaf, then slept without letting go of the rifle, waking twice to the hiss of wind and once to the sound of her name said in a voice that might have been memory or rain. When morning came, it wore the gray of hammered tin, thunder threatening from the south, and she was already in the saddle before the first blue jay scolded, moving at a foxtrot that ate ground without bragging about it, the mare's breath pluming as the air cooled. By mid-morning, the ridge east of her grew a line of riders, 3 at first, then 2 more, silhouettes like punctuation against the sky, and she slid the rifle up, rested it against her thigh, and waited with the kind of stillness that makes a hunter nervous. "Name yourself," one called when they were close enough for faces, and she said Ayanna in the even, flat voice that had kept her alive when other voices wanted her to scream. "Cole Marin sent me. I carry proof." And the leader, a tall man with hair streaked by years of sun and a jaw set like a man who had learned to grind his own corn, exchanged looks with the rider to his left, then touched 2 fingers to the brim of his hat in something that was not quite respect and not quite relief. "Isaiah Freeman," he said, the name falling like a weight placed where it belonged. "We've been watching this trail all morning. Thought you were a decoy for Thornton's men." And she answered, "I'm the knife he doesn't know he dropped," which made the youngest rider grin before he remembered he had been taught not to. They cut off the trail into a swale of cottonwoods where the creek ran quiet, and what Ayanna first took for scattered camp trash resolved into a careful settlement. Tents stitched from army canvas and feed sacks, lines of tack hung under a brush arbor, a smith's makeshift forge black as a swallowed star, 2 women scraping hides and talking low, 3 boys with their hair cut square learning to cast bullets from a man with a scar that had stolen the left half of his smile. Coffee smoked from a blackened pot, and the smell of it braided with gun oil and wet leather and bread baked in a Dutch oven, and the human scent of people who had not stopped running but had stopped for an hour, pretending they were not tired. Isaiah led her into a big wall tent where a table had been made from 2 doors laid over barrels, the doors scarred by hinges and the kind of fists that come down when a man says, "Listen," and on the table lay maps of counties and telegraph lines annotated in a small, neat hand, strings pinned between towns like gut on a fiddle, and beside the maps, a wooden box filled with folded dispatches that had been smuggled inside Bible covers and flour sacks, and once, if the note on the top of the pile could be believed, stitched into the hem of a wedding dress. "Marin said you'd come," Isaiah began, the words plain and unhoarded, "and that you carried something that could finish what we started." And Ayanna unbuttoned her coat without hurry, drew the flat tin from beneath her dress, the way one draws a blade you intend to use rather than admire, set it on the table, and stepped back while Isaiah cut the pitch with a pocket knife that had whittled more than wood. The first packet he lifted shimmered with oilskin and years. He peeled it back, and the papers inside were written in 2 hands, one a quartermaster's crisp arrogance, the other an officer's tidy ambition, and the names shook the air. Routes and lots and weights, seized for the cause and never delivered, signatures that tied G. Thornton to wagon loads that vanished like snow, Hargrove to adjudications that transferred titles with the delicacy of a surgeon and the ethics of a thief. Isaiah's face changed the way a man's face changes when a doctor tells him the thing that's been eating him has a name, relief and fury yoked together. "Good Lord," he breathed, not as a prayer, but as a measurement. "This is it." And a woman in a patched calico dress, who had come to the tent flap with a ledger in her hands, said, "Names are no good unless you speak them where they echo." And Isaiah nodded and said, "Martha would have said the same." And Ayanna had to swallow before she could say, "Martha died yesterday buying me an hour." And the woman with the ledger closed her eyes and put the ledger down and pressed her palm to it, as if blessing it, and Isaiah took a breath that hurt to watch and said, "Then we make the hour count." And he told Ayanna how it would be done. They would copy the worst of the list into figures and signal groups that could be sent by wire without telling a listening clerk what was being told. They would send that wire to Colonel James Harper in Houston, a federal marshal who had a reputation for answering laws that counties mislaid, and they would send with it a token Isaiah carried, iron and ugly, stamped with a broken chain, a promise hammered into metal that had once been the ring of an ankle. "He'll know me by this," Isaiah said, holding the token like a small black sun, "and he'll come with men who don't bow to local judges." And the woman with the ledger began to write, and 2 others joined her. 3 heads bent over a code that turned damning names into numbers and coordinates into psalms, their pencils scratching a sure, tight music, while Ayanna drank coffee that made her hand stop shaking for the first time since dawn and watched the door like it might try something. When the copies were folded and sealed in wax and wrapped in oilcloth and then wrapped again in a chemise torn into strips so the paper would not speak in the rain, Isaiah spread the county map and put his big brown finger on the road that led to Liberty, a little knot of buildings and bad habits on the east fork of the creek, and said, "The wire's here, next to the livery. The operator's young and honest when his boss is not watching and less honest when he is, which means you must make the message travel faster than anyone can read it. And Ayanna said, I go alone. And Isaiah said, You go with Hiram as far as the limestone pass. And Ayanna shook her head, and Isaiah did not argue the way a man with sense does not argue with a flood. He merely said, Hiram knows a cut that saves you 2 miles in 3 minutes, and he can catch a bullet meant for you if that is what the math asks. And she looked at Hiram where he stood at the flap, young and older than his face, hat in hand like he had learned manners someplace that did not keep them, and she nodded once and said, Ride light. And Hiram grinned like he'd already done it and would again, and the woman with the ledger, Martha's friend, she learned, called Ruth, put a hand on Ayanna's sleeve and slid into her palm a tiny folded scrap that turned out to be 2 thorns tied with thread, for crossing words with men who think they were born to make them, Ruth said, and Ayanna tucked the charm under her sash because she had learned to accept kindness the way one accepts ammunition. The sky was the color of pewter when she left, the first drops fat and far apart like scouts, the paint mare eager for the run as if she had read the map too, Hiram a dark sound on her 6, not crowding but close enough to pull her out of the saddle if she fell. They took Isaiah's cut, down a draw choked with cedar and up a narrow fault in the limestone where the hooves rang like small bells, and the rain came with the decisiveness of a verdict, stitching the trees to the ground in wet thread, making the road a ribbon of churned clay that grabbed at their mounts' fetlocks, their clothes clinging like extra skins, guns wrapped in oilcloth under their coats. Halfway through the pass they found the relics of somebody else's failure, an old wagon burned to the tires, ash welded into ribs, a skillet mouthed down in the mud like a coin a desperate man had tried to spend on luck, and Hiram touched the char with 2 fingers and said, Sheriff made his point here last winter. And Ayanna said, Men like him always say the same thing. All of this is mine, and none of this is my fault. And Hiram laughed without pleasure and said, You talk like a book I wish somebody had read me when I was 10. And she said, Books are just maps other people drew from the wrong hill, which made him blink and shut up and ride better. When the rain eased toward dawn, the country softened in its relief, fences where there had been none, windmills ticking, plowed fields with the careful, hopeful geometry of people who still believed their hands could change dirt into bread, and Liberty's steeple pricked the horizon like a pin through a sinful town's hat, whitewashed and smug, and Hiram pulled up on a little rise from which a man could see the whole main street in one turn of the head and said, I go no farther. And when she turned to argue, he shook his head and pointed at the livery yard where 2 horses stood tacked and ready under the shed, and a man in a deputy's hat pretended to fix a halter while watching the telegraph door in a way that made the word pretend work too hard. And Ayanna breathed once through her teeth and nodded and said, If the town eats me, make noise west. And he said, I already started. And she handed him the last of the jerky from her pocket, and he held it like church bread and said, You Apaches make strange saints. And she said, Only saints that bleed. And he grinned again and turned his horse and was gone, throwing up a little theatrical dust for any eyes that needed a story, and she straightened her shawl and braided her wet hair into something that read as penitent rather than proud, then rode down the slope at a clerk's pace, as if she had come to town to buy thread and leave a rumor. Liberty was waking slow, doors propped, bread steam bleeding into the alley behind the bakery, a blacksmith's hammer beginning its day-long argument with iron, men sweeping stoops as if they could brush away what they had done there yesterday, and a stray dog that had somehow lost the right to be anyone's barked at her once, as if to say, I see you, and I don't know which side you fall on, and she nodded at the dog because the question was fair. She tied the mare at the post outside the telegraph office, touched the oilskin-wrapped copy at her waist to be sure it had not dissolved into a lie, then paused at the window and saw not herself, but the girl from the auction, the one who had stared down a room full of men and said, "You paid for me, now do it," not as invitation, but as indictment, and the memory of that night's well stone against her palms, and Cole's hand steadying her from behind, and the way she had hated him for being gentle, because gentleness had always come with chains, bent her mouth for half a second before she ironed it flat again. She took the door handle, felt the cheap tin bite her palm, and entered the office with her face arranged into the quiet of a woman no man notices twice, and the boy at the key, barely shaving, spectacles clouded from the damp, looked up and pushed them down his nose and said, "Ma'am?" And she said, "I need to send a message to Colonel James Harper of the Federal Marshals in Houston," and laid on the counter Isaiah's iron token that looked like a piece of night and the folded code that could hang a judge, and the boy's mouth opened enough to let out the small "oh" a person makes when he realizes that his day has become the story he will tell for the rest of his life. The boy's fingers trembled, but when they settled on the brass key, they moved with the earnest clatter of someone who'd been waiting his whole small life to become necessary. He slid Isaiah's iron token toward himself as if it might burn, nodded once at the coded sheet, then began to tap, the sound stitching through the room like a nervous heart, and Ayanna stood with her back to the door and her eyes on the street through a slice of window where the wavy pane made all men look a little more dishonest. "Cost'll be dear," he muttered without looking up, and she laid coin on the counter, the last of Isaiah's silver, and said, "Truth always is," and he almost smiled because the line fit what the key was saying. He worked fast, a boy made into a wire by duty, sweat blooming at his temples despite the damp morning, pausing only to ask for a repeated group and then nodding at her answer as if they'd rehearsed it in some other life. Outside, a wagon rattled past and horses stamped, and a woman called a child's name. Then the street's noise broke, as if someone had lowered a lid over the town, and in the quiet that followed, she heard the rhythm of hooves that don't hurry because they don't have to. She didn't turn. "Back door?" she asked. The operator jerked his chin toward the storeroom, never stopping his tapping. "Do I stop if they come in?" "You stop when your finger breaks," she said, and he swallowed and kept the code moving toward Houston with a focus that looked like courage from where she stood and like prayer from the part of him that had been a child yesterday. She slid through the storeroom, past crates of wire and jars of cheap ink and a broom that had never met a corner it liked, found the rear door and cracked it with 2 fingers, letting a thin thread of alley air comb the sweat from her neck. The smell of yeast from the bakery drifted sweet and oblivious. The smell of wet horse came bitter behind it, and then the voice she knew without ever having heard it quiet, Thornton's worst trick, uncoiled into the office. "Morning, son. Sheriff's business." The boy's key faltered 1 heartbeat and then resumed like a man whistling past a grave. "Sir?" he tried, palms squeaking against the desktop, and the sheriff's hat shadow moved across the slatted light striping the counter. "Telegraph for Houston. Strange hour for piety." "Just a freight rate," the boy lied gamely, and Ayanna slid into the alley, let the door settle until the latch whispered home, and moved left, not right, because men whose boots cost more than a month's wheat always expect the quick path, never the one that smells of flour and chicken bones. She reached the corner and saw her mare where she'd left her, and 2 deputies with the bored attention of men told to watch a barn for a wolf. She didn't look at them. She looked at the roofs and found a line. Rain barrel, low shed, stacked crates. She stepped up the crates, towed the barrel rim, grabbed the gutter, and pulled herself onto the livery's awning in a single, graceless heave that still felt like a prayer answered. The awning groaned, but held, and she crawled like a thief toward the telegraph signboard, slipped behind it, and flattened there, listening. "What you sending?" Thornton asked inside, patience clipped into pieces and arranged like cards. The boy said, "Sir, and the key went on, its clatter now sounding like a man running in place, and Thornton's leather creaked, the sound of a hand settling near a gun, and then a second voice, high with nerves, said, "Boss, she ain't on the horse," and boots hit the boardwalk, and one deputy cursed about gutters that stain a coat, and Ayanna slid her hand under her sash and found the derringer by touch, the big rifle useless where she lay, the small gun a lie that sometimes tells the truth. A shout rose at the head of the street. Hiram, God bless his misdirection, riding past at a gallop with his hat off and a whoop like a drunk's, 3 men in pursuit because even cowardice likes a chase, and half the town turned to look at the comedy, and in that turning she moved. Dropped from the awning to the water trough, splashed like a baptizing, landed in a crouch, and came up with the reins already in her fist. The mare leaped as the deputies shouted. Someone's hand brushed the back of her shawl and got only wet cloth for his trouble. She bent low, and the mare did what mares do when a woman means it. She flew. The street narrowed with bodies and barrels, and she threaded them, shoulder skimming a wagon wheel, toe grazing a step, the world making that high, thin sound it makes when speed and danger share a roof. Behind her, the sheriff didn't shout. He just breathed the word, "Now," and his men pulled into the open like knives drawn from a drawer. Ayanna cut left, then left again into an alley that wasn't really an alley so much as the space a builder had forgotten to admit was part of the town. It stank of potatoes and rain, but it led to the back lane that led to the mill road that led to the south, and she took it at a reckless slide, the mare's hooves punching mud into applause. The first bullet slapped brick inches from her ear, kicking red dust like a blush. The second took a splinter off the saddle's cantle. The third went wide because the man shooting it wanted to enjoy himself, and joy is a lousy marksman. She didn't fire back. She didn't waste the sound. At the lane's end, a narrow bridge threw itself across a gully like a dare, rails missing, planks warped, creek flashing mean under it. 2 figures waited there, reeds for mustaches and deputy badges like cheap sons. The one on the right grinned, showing a row of teeth with more gaps than law, and lifted a hand as if flagging a train. She saw the opening, the left post where the handrail had rotted, put her heel to the mare's flank, and aimed not for the bridge, but the ragged lip of earth before it, and the mare leaped because the mare had not been told this was impossible. They hit the bank past the deputies with a crash that tore a curse from her throat and a cheer from no one at all, and the left-hand deputy fired reflex and hit his friend in the hip and screamed, "Jesus!" like a boy who'd dropped a Sunday plate, and then they were through, the bridge behind gagging on the mistake it had failed to enforce. The road south ran open for a furlong and then tightened into a chute of willow and thorn. She let the mare choose the line, trusting horse sense over memory, but the men behind had traded distance for fury and were closing. She felt the old shape of fear settle in her bones, and she did the only thing she'd taught herself to do with it. She made it work. She reached back, pulled the oilskin-wrapped copy, snapped the twine with her teeth, and tore the last page free, the one with names that might hang a judge twice, and shoved it deep into the pocket sewn under her sash and stuffed the rest, the lesser copies, into her boot, the place a search never starts because it ends there bleeding. Another shot stitched air too close to her temple, and she cut into the trees, took a deer path that turned twice back on itself like a lie, and came out on a cart track that angled toward a stand of boulders 1/2 a mile distant, the old calving ground where rock broke into shapes big enough for a story to hide in. She heard a rider gain her left, the ugly breath sound of a man who smoked more than he slept, and she let him come level, saw the pitted face and the quick eyes that had learned to enjoy disappointment, and she raised the Derringer and fired once, and the small gun made a small sound that wrote a big change, the man's hat lifting clean from his head as if a hand of God had decided it preferred the air, and he jerked, his horse shied, and the next rider plowed into them both because men who chase don't look at what they're about to catch. She didn't wait to see the tangle. She drove the mare harder, the boulders now near enough to breathe their cool. She slid from the saddle at the first rock like a woman half falling, slapped the mare's rump, and the horse trotted off with a practiced innocence that said no rider had ever needed her. Ayanna ducked into a seam between two stones, breath tight and hot in her chest, ribs a metronome in a mad song, and she counted shots. 1, 2, 3 from different throats, then quiet, then a hoof sliding on stone, a curse, another careful step. They'd spread out, the way men do when they want a cage without showing the bars. She took the rifle in both hands and let its weight steady her. If she could drop one clean, the others might think better of being brave. A hat edge showed and she almost took it and didn't, remembering a boy's trick of testing a mark with a brim on a stick. She held, waited, let the silence grow teeth. Then a boot scraped close, a heavy man, careful, but not enough, and she pivoted with the rifle tight to her shoulder, and the face that rose into her sights wasn't a deputy's at all, but Cole's, sweat-striping dust, blue eyes narrowed to the kind of focus that makes a surgeon jealous. "Don't," he breathed, and she didn't, lowering the barrel with a fury she did not have time to name, and he slid in beside her, and his hand came to her sleeve the way a man steadies a lantern in a wind, and they didn't look at each other again, because looking is a luxury when men are counting your breaths. "Harper, get the wire," he whispered. "The key was singing when I left," she said. "Then we buy the song an encore," he said. He pointed with his chin toward the far side of the rocks. "2 on the right, 1 left, maybe a 4th circling. Thornton'll hang back. He likes to kick doors other men open." "We go or dig," she said. "Go," he said. "The mission cabin's 5 miles, stone walls, 1 door. We can hold there until the song ends." She nodded, and he did something she did not expect. He took the carved story stick from his pocket and pressed it into her palm. "I remembered," he said, like a confession and a dare, and she closed her fingers around the wood and felt the shallow crosshatch she'd cut for House of Ghosts, and it steadied her in a way religion never had. "On 3, he said. 1, she said, and then he blew out 2, 3, and moved first, because that's what a man does when he wants a woman to live, and she moved with him, because that's what a woman does when she's done letting men decide for her. They broke from the seam into the scrub, low and fast, and shots followed with the panicked wastefulness of men who don't know where to aim. A twig snapped inches from her eye, a rock spat grit against her cheek, and Cole's revolver barked twice, not at men but at branches, cutting sightlines, making the world more complicated for anyone who wanted it simple. They reached the far edge of the stones and slid down a shelf into a wash where the sand was clean of prints, and then they were running half-bent beside it, boots punching a rhythm the land did not mind, until they found her mare where the animal had deigned to wait under a live oak with the patience of saints and fools. Cole swung into the bay, winced, the kind of wince men make when they're bleeding somewhere they can't check yet, and she mounted, and they kicked together, the horses finding a gait that made their shadows look like one thing instead of two. The country south of Liberty isn't much to brag over. Low scrub, stingy soil, jackrabbits with better theology than the townsfolk, and they used all of it. choosing the gray paths that looked like mistakes from a saddle. Behind them came pursuit, then confusion, then a pause, and Ayanna said, "Thornton's thinking," and Cole said, "Good." Thought slows him. They didn't speak for a mile. The sky lifted and light spilled down like something a child had wanted to keep for himself and finally had decided to share. In that light she saw the old mission's roofline, stones dragged into duty by hands that had hoped duty was a sacrament, not a punishment, set back in a fold of land with a cottonwood shouldering its west wall, a place that had learned how to outlast the talk of men. "There," Cole said, and the word felt like a drink. They reached it with the horses blowing and their own lungs voting to secede. He slid down, whimpered despite himself, and she saw then the dark blooming under his shirt where a crease shot had tucked a burning kiss along his ribs. "Later," he said, and she said, "Now," and tore cloth into a bandage, packed it with a palm full of clean dust, the old field trick, and cinched him to a hiss. He nodded thanks. He didn't have time to say, and they dragged a table against the door and tacked a blanket across the tiny rear window to confuse aim. She stacked cartridges where her fingers liked to find them. He filled the lamp and then didn't light it, and for a minute there was only the sound of two hearts remembering the first time they'd been asked to behave. "Harper will come if he heard the wire," Cole said. "And if not?" she asked. He looked at her mouth a beat too long, then at the door. "Then we'll hold until the men who want us forget why we mattered." She almost smiled. Men like that never remember why anything matters. They only remember where they put their boots. Hoofbeats found them then, building slow from a distance like rain the ground had ordered. Voices followed, men trying to sound casual for each other, because fear is contagious when it listens, and in the middle of them a quiet that felt like polished wood. Thornton. "Marin," he called, not loud, not needing to be. "I admire a man who picks his own gallows." And Ayanna leaned toward the door and said in the voice of a woman who had outlived a great many bad ideas, "We picked a house." And silence answered, the kind that comes when a man recalculates what a woman is. Cole grinned despite the blood heat at his side, and the grin made him look almost the age he'd been in the photograph on the mantel. "You ready?" he asked. "I was born, and then I learned to be," she said, and set her shoulder to the wall where the stone met the frame, and outside the men finished arranging themselves into the shape of a mistake, and the afternoon drew its hinge toward evening, and the telegraph wire far away in Houston might or might not have finished carrying a prayer in numbers to a marshal who had not yet learned he was about to be asked to choose between his job and the work. And Chapter 3, if anybody had been writing it down, came to the line where men who dealt in lists and men who dealt in mercy both had to show their hands. 2 days later, dawn came thin and colorless, the kind of light that made the stone mission look like an apology left too long in the weather. Mist clung to the wash, and the cottonwood at the west wall let its leaves whisper, as if repeating a prayer it only half believed. And inside the cabin, Ayanna and Cole moved in a quiet, built from necessity rather than hope, counting cartridges and measuring the room with their eyes the way gamblers count exits with their backs to a wall. They had a box and a half of .44 for Cole's Colt, a handful of brass for the rifle Ayanna favored, and the little Derringer with 1 round left that she kept not for killing a man, but for closing a choice. The air carried the metallic tang of a storm that might not come, and beneath it, a smell of wood that remembered fire, and beneath that, the breath of 2 horses tied behind the mission in a fold of earth where a man would not think to look first. Cole's shirt was dark at the ribs where the crease wound had oozed through the dust packing, but the bleeding had slowed to a stubborn stain, and he'd wrapped the bandage tight, tying the knot with a grunt that sounded like a man promising himself one more hour than he might deserve. "You should lie down," Ayanna said, not looking at him as she stacked cartridges on the table she had dragged against the door, lining them up in little rows like a clerk determined to make the ledger balance. "You going to shoot for both of us?" he asked, the corner of his mouth twitching toward a smile that could not afford itself yet. "I'll shoot for the list," she said, touching the oilskin packet beneath her sash the way a believer touches a relic. "And I'll shoot for Martha, and for what my mother called back from the ashes. If there's a bullet left after that, I might spend it on you if you keep talking." He shook his head, checked the cylinder, and moved to the slit of window they'd left unblanketed, just enough to angle a barrel out and catch a sliver of the slope. The world beyond the stones had that hollow, quiet spaces get just before men arrived to fill them with noise, and then the noise came in small pieces, hoofbeats first, counted and categorized, 6, then 8, then a pause, then 3 more placed like punctuation, and beyond them the slow shift of men dismounting who had learned to keep their tack from speaking about them. A jay scolded and was ignored. A rider wheeled into view on the north side, then sidled out again like a rehearsal. Cole put his shoulder against the wall and let the cold of the stone speak to the heat of his blood. "How many?" Ayanna asked, her breath steady even as her fingers danced along the cartridges, touching each like beads on a story. "9 in the first ring," he said, "and the quiet that sounds like 10 more thinking about being brave." And then the quiet found a center, and from that center a voice rose with the long ash drawl of a man who believed his own lies so thoroughly they had begun to pass for ordinances. "Morning, Marin," Sheriff Gage Thornton said, not loud. He never needed loud. "I admire a man who picks his view." And Ayanna glanced at Cole, sharp and amused despite the math, and said low, "He thinks you chose this hill for him." And Cole said, "I chose it so the wind could carry his last words somewhere worth hearing." "I'll make you a sermon," Thornton continued, as if he had a congregation rather than hired men with more debts than courage. "You step out with your hands folded, and the woman walks free. The papers come to me, and the world keeps turning, and you stop making trouble you are too tired to enjoy." Ayanna leaned near the jam and let her voice answer, flint dry. "Men like you always mistake the sound of the world turning for your own boots." And a small laugh rippled through the brush outside before it was smothered, the way men kill humor when a boss forgets to clap. Thornton waited a courteous second, then said, "You've got wit and a spine, miss." "I respect both, but respect doesn't keep roofs from burning." And on that word, burning, Cole saw 2 men in his slit of view lift bottles necked with rag and watched a third touch match to cloth with the care of a midwife. He didn't fire at the flame. He fired at the wrist, and the bottle spun toward dirt and burst in a flower of useless fire that licked at scrub and died. Ayanna's rifle spoke second, clipping the second man across the knuckles so the bottle fell against his boot and he danced it off with a yell, throwing sparks that stung more than they damaged. "First lessons free," she murmured, and racked the lever, and Cole breathed out through his nose like a horse easing into a hard run. The men outside shifted, reassigning courage and distance, and Thornton said mildly, "You're wasting your water," to which Cole answered, "You're wasting your men," and then added, "Because truth sometimes wants to be plain. Turn back, Gage. This day has a way of ending," and Thornton let his silence prove he understood the sentence, even if he meant to edit it. The first volley came thrown and sloppy, test shots sent to measure reply rather than to kill, and Ayanna wasted no round in answer, letting wood splinter and stone spit dust into her hair without complaint. Cole put one round into the brush where he'd seen a hat inch forward on a stick and was rewarded with a muffled curse and a body dragging itself backward like an afterthought. The quiet that followed had a different shape, less show, more work, and then to the right, a man with a farm hat and a rifle older than his fear belly crawled to a line that would have let him rake the door if he'd had patience, and Ayanna winged him through the meat of the shoulder, and he stayed where he lay, struggling with a prayer he had not rehearsed enough to finish. 9 becomes 8, she said, and Cole said, and somewhere 10 becomes 9, and they both waited for the math to even its temper. The sun pulled itself higher by inches, but the day remained pale, as if light had decided to save itself for someone who deserved it, and in that pale, Cole felt his wound begin to hammer and push the pain down the ladder of his spine the way he had learned to do when a surgeon needed him still. Ayanna cut a strip from her sash and tied her braid back tight until the skin at her temples was smooth, a calm act in a room that was collecting nervousness like dust. "Harper will come," she said, not pleading it, but lodging it in the space where plans wear their names, and Cole nodded because the boy in Liberty had sounded like a man making an oath with his hands. "And if he doesn't," she added, because she was honest with both gods and people, "then we make these stones into a story and let the wind carry what's left." And he said, "I've seen worse epitaphs," and then he reached without looking and found her wrist and squeezed it once, not as a lover, though something like that had begun to raise its head inside him despite the smoke, but as a soldier, the way men in broken lines take count of who is still there by the heat of their pulse. "You ready?" he asked, and she said, "I have been ready for years. I am only now allowed to act," and the line settled between them like a plank you could walk. Outside, Thornton's voice moved to the left and down, and with it the scuff of men who wanted higher ground. "2 on the cottonwood," Cole said, and Ayanna answered by shifting her weight and putting her shoulder to the west wall, bracing to absorb the recoil. The men in the tree fired 5 quick shots through leaves, guessing at geometry, and Cole shot the trunk low, not to kill, but to relocate, and a man slipped and lost his perch and swore like a man who had trusted wood and been reminded it prefers birds. The second volley from the brush came tighter, smarter. A round sparked off the table leg and stung Cole's shin. A splinter bit Ayanna across the knuckles so small it was barely a sting, and still annoyed her for the disrespect of it. "They're thinking now," Cole said, and she said, "Then they will mistake clever for right." And in answer to the clever, a torch arced with a practiced throw toward the thatch still clinging to the mission's old rafters, the rag sputtering red as a struck snake as it flew, and this time neither of them could take it out of the air. It landed with a grease pop and took in an instant, the dry thatch lifting flame like a choir lifts a note it was born to hold. Smoke wrote itself along the ceiling in tight gray cursive and then loosened into a hand that pulled at their throats. "Down," Cole said, dropping to one knee, and Ayanna followed, dragging the cartridges from the table into a lower pile with a speed that made neatness less neat. The room changed. Shape and light and breath all changed. Sound warped, duller and nearer, and outside, Thornton called without triumph, "Fire is the oldest deputy, Marin," and Cole coughed and said, "So is rain." "You still don't control either," and the sheriff's answer came soft. "I control the minutes," and for a moment, because smoke steals bravado first, it felt true. Ayanna wet a band of cloth from the canteen and tied it across Cole's mouth, then across her own, the water stinging where dust and splinter had kissed. She crawled to the rear window, lifted a corner of the blanket, and took a lung of fresher air, then fired once at a shape moving dumb toward the stone. Dumb, because the person who had ordered him forward thought fire and fear would do the work and had forgotten what a woman's aim does when you ask it to hold a life. The shape folded. Two more shapes reconsidered becoming heroes. Heat climbed, clinging to the rafters, thinking. Smoke layered itself into flavors: pitch, mouse nest, old hymnals, the ghost of dried sage someone had hung there a decade ago in the first generous month of a marriage. Ayana's eyes watered, then steadied as she blinked them clean with soldier's efficiency. Cole set his back to the warmest wall and felt it tell him truths he already knew. That the roof would go from smolder to anger and then to gravity, that they would have to leave on their feet or not at all. "We'll make a door we didn't build," he said, nodding toward the south wall where the stone ran rougher, the mortar weaker. "We have no time," she said, measuring the speed of the flame with a glance the way a mother measures a fever with her lips. "Then we borrow some," he said, and moved to the door, lifted the latch slow, and waited for the breath of air to pull smoke across the threshold like a curtain. "You'll take one in the chest," she warned. "I'll take one in the wood," he said, and kicked the table forward with a mule snap. The door cracked open, and a shot slammed into the table's edge, shivering the wood, and three more came hungry, and Ayana fed back one round, which found nothing but bark and the suggestion of a decision, and in that flurry the smoke boiled outward and bought them seconds. Cole shut the door with a heel and pointed at the south wall. The stones were old and not entirely convinced of each other. Ayana took the butt of the empty rifle and slammed it sideways into the mortar as if it were a man who had mistaken his name, and a flake popped, then another. Cole used the Colt's grip like a hammer, jaw clenched against the hurt in his side, and the wall began, grudgingly, to admit a palm, then a fist, then a promise of a hole a child could be shoved through, and in the middle of that work the roof announced itself with a crack like a broken oath and coughed a throatful of sparks down upon them. "Faster," he said pointlessly, and she gave him a look that would have shamed a braggart into silence and struck again. "Outside," Thornton called. "Last chance," as if mercy could be counted like money, and Ayana said to the stone, "We don't take your chances," and to the sheriff, though he could not hear it, "We make our own," and the hole widened until it had the shape of an escape if not the courtesy. "Horses?" she asked, and he said, "If the saints like us," and she said, "We are not the saints they like." And then the roof sagged to make its argument in person, and they dove through the hole together into brightness and cold air and a slice of day that tasted like a gift. The slope fell away into scrub, and the scrub fell away into a wash, and the wash whispered to the creek that had started this day, and they ran bent and necessary, and behind them a man shouted, "There!" in the tone of a child who has found a coin and has not yet learned what it costs. Bullets followed, 4 making their introductions, one speaking too close and tearing a new ribbon in Cole's coat without the courtesy of skin, and Ayana turned once and sent back a single round so precise it made the 5th bullet never consider being born. They reached the fold where the horses had been tied and found Bay and Paint with their heads up and eyes wide and a patience that was not forgiveness but a contract. Ayana's fingers were clumsy with heat and ash and still found the knot in a breath, and they were mounted in the next breath, and the next was for turning east along the wash where dust and shadow made language with each other. "Harper," Cole said between teeth. If he heard, he should be close. And Ayana said, not as hope, but as mathematics, "Then the world has to do one true thing today." And the world, which had been stingy with its truth for a long time in this county, let a far sound arrive. Hoofbeats, many, moving like a thought that had remembered how to finish itself. Thornton heard it too. Ayanna felt the change in the men behind them, the way pursuit tightens its belt when it realizes the theater has announced a second act with new billing, and he called, less mild now, more human, "Take them now." And his men, who had wanted to wait to survive, tried to become sudden. The wash bent south, the trees parted, and ahead the old wagon track ran straight as a scripture toward a rise, and on that rise sunlight flashed on metal in a disciplined line, and riders crested the ridge in blue coats dust gray, stars on their chests that were not decorations but work orders. Federal marshals under Colonel Harper, who rode big and straight as a promise that had come with witnesses, a bugle's single clean note cutting the smoke-thick air like cool water through ash. "There," Ayanna said, but to herself, because the next minutes had no room for words, and Cole lifted his Colt and felt something in his chest unclench that had been clenched for years. Not hope exactly, but the permission to put his body between someone and an ending that had been planned for them by a man with clean gloves. The marshals fanned like a book opening, and the day began again with a new grammar, and Thornton's men, who had counted minutes, started counting exits, and the cabin behind them leaned into its fall with a sigh big enough to be mistaken for relief. The ridge thundered as Harper's men poured down the slope like a blue tide swallowing fire. Rifles cracked in disciplined rhythm, smoke curling white against the black haze rising from the mission. Thornton's riders broke first, panic spreading faster than command. Half scattered for the cottonwoods, the rest turned their guns too late. Cole and Ayanna wheeled their mounts toward the narrow draw, firing as they ran. The sound was everywhere now, iron shoes hammering stone, shouts, the cough of rifles, and for a heartbeat it felt like the war had climbed out of its grave to have one last argument with itself. Ayanna saw Thornton near the center, his silver star flashing like a bad joke in the sunlight, barking orders. No one obeyed. Harper's bugler sounded again, a single, sharp note that cut through confusion like the edge of a verdict. The marshals rode through the smoke in staggered pairs, their formation clean and merciless. Cole reined in beside Ayanna at the bottom of the wash. His sleeve was dark with new blood, but his eyes were clear. "Stay low," he said, and she did, leaning forward, the horse's mane hot against her cheek as they darted between boulders. A marshal shouted something, "Cover them!" and a volley answered from the ridge. One of Thornton's men pitched sideways, another dropped his weapon and bolted for the brush. Ayanna's pulse drummed with the hoofbeats around her. The smell of burning pine mixed with gunpowder and sweat. She saw Martha then, impossible but real, staggering down from the far side of the field, her shoulder bound crudely, face gray with exhaustion, but alive. The sight hit Ayanna harder than the gunfire. Martha raised a hand, half greeting, half command. "Finish it." Thornton saw her too. His expression twisted, rage, disbelief, fear all tangled in one man who had never believed his sins could return walking. He spurred his horse forward, cutting across the line of fire toward Cole and Ayanna. "You think this ends with me?" he shouted. "You don't know how deep it goes." Cole turned in the saddle, leveled his Colt, and fired twice. The first shot missed. The second shattered Thornton's stirrup, throwing him sideways. The sheriff hit the ground hard, rolled, came up limping but still armed. Smoke drifted between them like ghosts keeping score. Ayanna dismounted, dropping behind a fallen log, reloading with quick, sure hands. Thornton's voice carried, hoarse but venomous. "You should have burned with the rest of them, girl." "You should have buried yourself with your kind," she answered, standing into the line of fire. Her shot tore his hat away, grazing his temple. He fired back wild, the bullet splintering the log. Cole advanced from the flank, blood streaking his jaw. "Gage!" he called, his tone flat and weary. "You're out of men, out of time, out of goddamn breath. Drop it." Thornton laughed, the sound cracked and desperate. "You don't get to preach mercy to me, Yankee. You made this war." "Then I'll end it," Cole said, but his gun sagged. His wound was bleeding again, his strength leaking away with the color in his face. Thornton saw it, smiled, and raised his pistol. "Looks like justice dies same as everything else, slow and crawling." He aimed at Ayanna. She moved to fire, but the hammer on her rifle jammed half-cocked, useless. The world shrank to breath and distance. The shot that followed didn't come from either of them. It came from behind. Martha, standing unsteady but resolute, both hands on her revolver. Her voice carried clear and hard across the clearing. "For Thomas." Thornton's body arched once, then dropped to his knees, the pistol slipping from his grasp into the ash. The silence after was vast. Even the horses stilled, as if the land itself had exhaled. Harper rode up, his coat scorched, his expression grave. "Is it done?" he asked. Cole looked to Ayanna. She nodded once. "It's done." Martha sagged where she stood. Ayanna ran to catch her, easing her to the ground. "You stubborn woman," Ayanna whispered, half scolding, half prayer. Martha smiled faintly. "Didn't come this far to let the devil win." Harper knelt beside them, removing his hat. "Ma'am, you've done this country a service." "I did it for the dead," she murmured, then closed her eyes, breath slowing to a whisper, but steady with the wind. Ayanna pressed her forehead to Martha's hand, the skin already cooling. Cole stood behind her, hat in hand, the flames of the mission painting his silhouette against the smoke. Harper rose, turning to his men. "Get the wounded tended. Collect every scrap of paper, every weapon." "The list?" Ayanna drew the oilskin packet from her sash and handed it over. "My father's proof," she said simply. Harper accepted it with reverence, unfolding one corner to glimpse the names scrawled there: judges, merchants, officers, men who had hidden their crimes behind uniforms and law. "This will tear the rot out by the roots," he said. "But it will need witnesses. Will you both testify?" Cole hesitated, then nodded. "We'll come to Austin." Harper's gaze softened. Then justice might just have a fighting chance. He gave orders, his men dispersing through the smoking field. For a long moment, Cole and Ayanna stood apart from the bustle, the world around them settling into the strange quiet that follows violence. "It's over," she said finally. "Not over," he answered, eyes on the horizon. "Just different." She studied him, the lines of his face cut deep by exhaustion and light. "Where will you go, Cole Marin?" "Wherever the wind isn't chained," he said, echoing her old words. "Maybe I'll follow it for a while." She smiled, small and true. "Then maybe the wind will finally find a home." They rode with the marshals as far as the ridge, then paused to look back. The mission was a black shell against the rising sun, smoke curling upward like the ghost of a vow kept too long. Harper's men would handle the rest. Austin awaited with courts and oaths, but that would be another kind of battle. For now the road stretched east, clean and unclaimed. Cole turned his bay toward it. "You sure about this?" he asked. Ayanna adjusted the reins, her braid catching the morning light. "I've been sure since the night you cut that chain." He gave a low laugh. That night you told me, you paid for me, now do it. Guess I'm still figuring out what it meant. She looked at him, eyes bright, fierce as ever. It meant prove you're different. You did. The answer sat between them like peace. They rode in silence for a while, the wind teasing through the grass, the smell of rain far off but coming. Behind them, the marshal's bugle sounded once more, a salute to the dead, to duty, to those who'd held a line long enough for the law to catch up. Ahead, the plains opened gold under the sun. Cole reached into his coat, drew out the battered photograph of his old unit, stared at it, then tore it clean in half and let the pieces drift away. No more ghosts, he said. Only debts paid. Ayanna glanced at him, then at the sky. Debts paid, but stories left, she replied. The land remembers. So will we. The horses picked up pace, hooves drumming the rhythm of a future neither could name yet. The wind rose behind them, scattering ash, carrying smoke into distance until even that was gone. Two riders against the endless light, no longer hunter and hunted, just what remains when mercy outlives vengeance. The past lay buried beneath the burned stones of Hollow Creek, and ahead waited the long road west, a place for beginning again. As they crested the last rise, Ayanna turned in her saddle for one final look at the valley below. The smoke was thinning, drifting into clouds. She whispered something in her mother's tongue, too soft for Cole to catch, then faced forward. What did you say? He asked. Goodbye, she said, and thank you. He nodded. For what? For paying the price. They rode on until the mission was only a memory in the morning haze, the sun lifting higher, the air tasting of grass and freedom. When they reached the open plain, Cole slowed the horses, letting them walk side by side. The silence between them was no longer heavy, but alive, full of things that didn't need saying. You ever think we'll find peace? He asked quietly. Ayanna looked ahead, where the sky touched the earth and the wind made everything move. Maybe not, she said, but we can make a place for it to visit. He smiled at that, a tired, real smile, and tipped his hat toward her. The wind answered for both of them, carrying the scent of rain and new grass, and the faint, fading echo of gunfire turned to thunder far behind. And somewhere in that wide, clean sound was the beginning of another story. 2 days later, the first morning after the fire carries no sound but the slow hiss of dying embers and the groan of timber giving up its shape. The air tastes of salt and soot. Ayanna stands barefoot where a porch used to be. Her skirt is torn, and the hem is black. She does not cry. The night already burned the tears away when the shooting stopped and the shouting washed into rain. What remains is the smell of things that once had names. Harper's men move through the ruins. Boots sink in ash that still breathes heat. Blankets cover faces. Shovels lift what can be lifted. Every spent cartridge is a confession to Harper. Every scuff is a ledger line. His sleeve is scorched. His eyes are tired. His voice stays low and steady. Cole Marin sits propped against a fallen beam near the edge of the clearing. His shoulder is wrapped. Smoke blew his face gray. One side of his hair is singed down to bristle. Ayanna kneels and he opens one eye. The blue is dulled but alive. You will live, she says. He smiles a small smile. Then I have kept the promise. Not yet, she answers. Martha rests under a canvas awning on a field cot. The bullet passed clean through. The medic says she will live if fever keeps its distance. She wakes long enough to ask for water, and then for Ayanna. Ayanna holds her hand. For Thomas, Martha whispers. Sleep takes her again. By mid-morning the clouds break. A thin light falls through the smoke. The ground steams like breath from the dead. The cabin looks like a rib cage half buried in coal. Harper dictates names. Gage Thornton. The Thorntons' men. 5 deputies. 2 locals who sold their honor for whiskey. He orders a trench for the dead. A wagon for the wounded. When he speaks to Ayanna, his tone softens. Miss Hayes, I owe you more than an apology. The department will too. You did what many men would not have dared. We did what had to be done, she says. He studies her. A young woman in a smoke-stained dress who stands straighter than any soldier. You will have to come to Austin, he says. Your testimony will be needed. Hargrove's name is on that list. Riders are already east. The government means to clean house. And him, Ayanna asks, looking toward Cole Marin. He will testify if he is fit to travel, Harper says. They make camp beside the creek. Rain comes again. Gentle. It rinses gray from the leaves and lays the cinders flat. Cole Marin dozes by the fire and murmurs broken pieces of years. Gettysburg. Thomas. Elizabeth. Ayanna listens until the words blend into one old sound of pain. She cleans Martha's wound. She feeds the coals. She watches a pale rope of smoke rise and twist like a prayer that does not know its address. Dawn finds them with a mercy of clean air. Harper forms the column. 20 riders. 2 wagons. Crates sealed with wax and numbers. He sets guards. He checks the lists. He moves like a man who has learned to trust steps more than hopes. Ayanna helps Martha into the wagon. She offers Cole Marin a hand. He refuses and heaves himself up with a grunt. Pain grabs him mid-rise and he laughs instead. You should not be moving, she says. I have been told that for 20 years, he says. They leave the black square in the field. From the ridge, Ayanna looks back once. Pines stand like half-ghosts around the scar. Something twists in her chest. Grief. Relief. Both at once. The promise cost blood. It also cut the chain that began at Hollow Creek. 2 days later, they reach the military road. They camp by a river crossing where a supply train waits under a stand of willow and cottonwood. Ayanna walks the bank alone. Wet clay and pine resin ride the air. She kneels to wash her hands. The water runs clear, then brown, then clear again. A dragonfly holds in place. It trembles. It vanishes. Steps sound behind her. Cole Marin leans on a hickory staff. You should be resting, she says. I tried, he says. The dreams would not let me. Still the war. Always the war. He looks across the current. It is different now. I used to see faces I failed to save. Now I see the ones I finally did. Ayanna studies him. What guilt carved? What fire burned away? You did save them, she says. Thomas. Elizabeth. Me. He shakes his head. You saved yourself. You saved me when you did it. Harper approaches with a small wooden chest sealed with wax. 2 soldiers stop behind him. He sets the chest on a rock. He breaks the seal. He lifts the lid. The scorched tin box lies inside, edges warped from heat. Miss Hayes, he says, I need your confirmation for custody. Ayanna nods. Harper slides a thin knife under the latch and lifts. He opens the folded paper with both hands. The ink blurs at the edges, but the names stand. She reads each one. She says it is the same list. Harper signals the clerk. The paper goes into a numbered cloth bag. The wax seal shines while it cools. The signatures go on the card. From now until the hearing it stays under my key, Harper says. That is right, Ayanna answers. It should. They travel slow. Martha grows stronger in inches. Sometimes she hums hymns from a church long gone. Harper rides ahead and sends couriers into the white noon. The sky turns Texas blue and makes sorrow seem small beneath it. On the fourth evening, they stop under cottonwoods. Men eat in a hush that tastes like relief and fear stirred in the same tin. Harper reads orders by lantern. Flies trace little orbits in the light. Ayanna mends a tear in Cole Marin's sleeve. His eyes follow her hands. Steady, sure. Life insists on itself by small motions, he thinks. Do you ever think about going back? He asks. She looks up. Back where? Before all this. Hollow Creek. Your father's farm. There is no back to go to, she says. Only forward. He nods and lets it in like a bitter medicine that heals. Later the fire shrinks to a red heart. Harper comes again. Austin is 3 days if the weather holds, he says. When we arrive, you both will rest. I will see to it. Ayanna thanks him. Cole Marin dips his head. The colonel pauses. Miss Hayes, you remind me of the people we hoped to save when the war began. Do not let the world make you hard. I will not, she says. But I will not forget. He moves away, and the stars sharpen in the black like pins through velvet. Ayanna looks up and thinks of Thomas Hayes and Elizabeth Sullivan. She thinks they would be proud. Pride feels like a small word for what she means. Cole Marin shifts beside her blanket. Do you ever wonder why we keep surviving? He says. Maybe so we can remember what did not, she says. He smiles and closes his eyes and lets the night carry him a little way. Before sleep, Ayanna checks Martha's bandage. It is dry. She adds wood with care. She rests her palm on the small wooden chest for a breath and then pulls her hand back. Custody is custody. Rules keep truth from wandering. The dawn comes clear and gold. The column moves. The road bends south. Austin waits with paper and ink and questions that grow more teeth the closer you get. Behind them, the black hollow fades into story. Ahead, there is law. There is testimony. There is whatever life looks like after smoke. Ayanna rides between Martha's wagon and Cole Marin's horse. The wind lifts her hair and takes the last of the ash scent out of it. She draws a long breath and does not taste fear for the first time in years. They pass a chapel that lost its bell. They pass a field where corn sprouts through old ash. They pass a burned fence line that someone has already begun to mend with fresh cedar. Ayanna watches the clean cuts of the new rails and feels a small click inside her like a latch finding true. At a noon halt, Harper drills a squad on guard rotations and asks the clerk to read the inventory again. The clerk reads in a dry voice, 1 tin box, 1 list in cipher, 3 ledgers from a feed store, 2 telegraph transcripts, 1 revolver with a sheriff's mark. Harper signs twice. The witnesses sign. He looks at Ayanna and nods. She nods back. The system is a stubborn horse, but it will carry weight if you sit straight. In the afternoon, a storm shoulders up from the west. The light goes green. The air goes still. The first drops hit like thrown pebbles. The riders pull canvas over the crates, and the wagons push for a stand of oak. Rain hammers the leaves and turns dust into slick clay. Ayanna and Cole Marin sit shoulder to shoulder under the wagon's lip. Martha sleeps with her mouth open like a child. The storm passes fast. The smell after is sharp and clean, and it makes the world look scrubbed. Ayanna laughs once without meaning to. Cole Marin hears it and laughs too. It sounds like 2 coins tapping in a drawer. That night a courier rides in with a folded paper for Harper. Orders. The hearing will be soon. The judge is named. Rutherford. There will be depositions first, and then the room where a gavel writes its short music in the air. Harper reads and folds and tucks the paper into his inner pocket. He tells Ayanna and Cole Marin and Martha. He says they did well. He says the road will be safe, but nothing is ever certain. He doubles the watches anyway. He has a quiet talk with the sergeant about men who drink at the wrong table and how money can loosen a hinge. The sergeant understands. The men bed down. The night insects begin their thin saw song in the grass. Ayanna lies awake and counts 4 names on her fingers. Thomas, Elizabeth, Clara, Cole Marin. She adds one more word with her thumb. Mercy. She does not whisper it. She holds it in her chest like a coal that gives heat without flame. Near midnight, a coyote calls from far off, and a horse answers with a soft thump of hoof. A guard coughs once and shuffles. The stars wheel. The fire drops to coals. Morning edges in like a pale ribbon. When it breaks fully, they are already saddled. Ayanna checks Martha's color. Good. Cole Marin rolls his shoulder and winces and says he will be fine. The wagons creak back onto the road. The column stretches and tightens with the bends. Sun climbs. Heat rises. The city line will meet them by tomorrow if the luck holds. Ayanna keeps her eyes forward. Past smoke. Past fear. Toward the voice of law and the hard work that comes after. She thinks of planting. She thinks of fences. She thinks of a door. Doors let grace in on tired days. She smiles at the thought. She keeps riding. The road delivers them into Austin at noon. Hard sky. Dust in the teeth. Iron at the gates. Harper takes the column straight to the federal compound where the flag moves like a steady lung. He signs. He logs. He hands over what must be handed. He orders cots. He posts guards. The crates go to a locked room with 2 keys and 3 names under the ledger. The tin box and the ciphered list ride inside one of those crates. Sealed. Numbered. Witnessed. Ayanna keeps her hands to herself because custody is a promise you do not smudge. Martha walks on her own. Slow. Upright. Cole Marin tries to refuse a stretcher, then quits the argument when pain bites him clean. A clerk with ink on every finger sets the plan. Depositions today. A hearing tomorrow, if the judge holds to his habits. The clerk says Judge Rutherford does not like noise. Harper half smiles. Good. Ayanna ties her hair back with a ribbon turned soft from miles. She washes smoke from her wrists. She stares into the basin until the water stops running gray. Then the first room. Soap and paper in the air. 2 windows open to a stone courtyard where a small fountain keeps talking in a patient voice. The court reporter waits. A woman with quick eyes and a pencil that moves faster than some men's thoughts. Ayanna sits straight. She swears the oath. She begins at Hollow Creek because that is the door the story uses. Lamps in a barn that felt like a fever. Numbers chalked on a board. Rope-biting skin that already knew how to scar. An old soldier with blue eyes saying $30 and meaning rescue. She keeps each sentence lean. She says what the hands did and what the night smelled like. She does not say what her heart did because the law writes slow when it tries to catch a heart. She reaches Gage Thornton's name and the room cools. She tells of the sheriff standing in Cole Marin's yard with courtesy like a knife under a napkin, of a single bullet left on a fence rail as if a sermon could be hammered into lead. She names Elizabeth Sullivan's journal. She names the packet Thomas hid because goodness sometimes wears a disguise to stay alive. Liberty. The telegraph. Martha's blood soaking into her dress. The bridge. The bluff. The cabin. Fire. Rain that came late and still felt like a witness. The reporter reads back one line. They won't stop until everyone who knows is silenced. Ayanna says yes. Her voice wavers once. Only once. Harper follows with a map of facts. Dates. Hours. Distances. Calibers. Chain of custody that holds like a good knot. The reporter's pencil never trips. Martha speaks next. She keeps it plain. She names fear, but does not let it name her. Cole Marin goes last. He says Gage Thornton the way a man says a psalm he should have said years earlier. He admits the 1863 failure and lets it sit on the table like a heavy coin. He admits the later bargain that put him close enough to strike. He speaks of Gettysburg and mud and Thomas's arm under his shoulder. The reporter slows for him. Honor makes space even on lined paper. When it is done, no one judges him out loud. They say thank you for your truth. That is more use than 2 kinds of blessing men try to drink from 10 kinds of bottle. Night falls fast when you are tired. Harper locks the evidence room and signs 3 lines. He signs again. He pockets the key. He posts a guard who knows the look of a bribe and does not like it. He tells Ayanna and Martha and Cole Marin to sleep while they can. The bed smells of starch. The pillow is too clean. Ayanna lies on top of the coverlet and listens to the city. Footsteps. A piano far off. A wagon wheel bumping a loose plank. Her mind keeps drawing letters in the air. T for Thomas. E for Elizabeth. C for Clara. N for Cole Marin. She draws one more shape. A door. Doors let grace in on tired days. She sleeps between 2 breaths. Morning wears its Sunday face, though it is not Sunday. The hearing room is high and bright. Plaster clean as a fresh shirt. Benches packed with mouths that want feed. Judge Rutherford sits under an eagle that looks like it remembers cleaner years. He is spare and exact. His voice is dry as a ledger. Hargrove enters with lawyers dressed like river stones. Smooth. Slippery. Their eyes skip the floor as if they fear what it shows. Hargrove's face is powdered grief on top and polished anger under it. He nods to men who have practiced neutrality until it looks like virtue. The clerk reads the names from the list. Each name lands with the sound of a boot finding wet wood. Harper lays out bones before blood. The cipher Thomas used. A sample of his hand matched to letters that survived a burn. 3 ledgers pulled from an honest-looking feed store that fed more than cattle. Telegraph transcripts gathered in Liberty. At the Liberty office, Ayanna files the wire at 2:10 p.m. A clipped reply from Houston prints at 3:05. Isaiah's riders clear a back trail during the night, while Harper's detachment saddles before dawn. 18 hard hours later, 2 changes of horse and a pine pitch lantern line, they reach the ridge above the cabin. The recovered colt stamped with a sheriff's mark that the fire could not erase. Then the blood. A strip of Martha's dress. A black hinge from the cabin. A char line on a beam cut away for proof. Hargrove's counsel rises. Honey on his tongue. Thorn hidden in his sleeve. He calls the list a trick by malcontents. He says Ayanna's past makes her eager to wear a badge she did not earn. He says Cole Marin is a dog that changed masters too late and still smells like the first hand that fed him. The benches lean forward. People love a burn they did not light. Rutherford lifts one finger. The sound in the room drops a step. Ayanna takes the stand. Her pulse drags nails across her ribs. She sets it aside. She gives her name, her age, the county that used to claim her before she learned to claim herself. Counsel asks if she is grateful to the government. If gratitude makes her blind. She says gratitude and blindness fight each other. She says she owes the court only the truth Thomas wrote by lamplight, while the world tried to rename things that already had names. He asks if she hated Gage Thornton. She says she hated what he did and what he meant. He asks if she came for vengeance. She says daylight. He asks about the tin box, about liberty, about the way Martha screamed. He likes that word too much. The judge tells him this room is not a saloon. She ends with one line. Mercy is the hardest victory I know. If the law gives justice, I will carry the rest. It hangs in the air like a bell that keeps ringing after the rope goes slack. Cole Marin follows. Slower now because some truths will not be thrown. They have to be carried. He names his failure. He names his plan. He names the moment a gun pointed at a girl and he thought, Thomas, I am late, but I am here. Counsel tries to snap at his heels. So you were the sheriff's hound. Cole Marin nods. I turned and bit the hand. The mark is still in my mouth. You can hear it when I speak. A murmur starts. The judge lifts an eyebrow. Silence returns to its chair. Harper testifies last for the government. He answers about custody twice. About the cipher once. He is steady enough to frighten men who lie for a living. Martha speaks again for the record. Courage walks the room holding her arm. Even the slick men forget to smirk for a moment. The judge retires. An hour crawls on its elbows. Outside, heat presses chalk and shadow flat against the steps. 2 men with banker's shine and whiskey breath drift too near. One throws a curl of a sentence meant to bruise. A marshal moves them along with soft iron. In the shade of a live oak, Ayanna hums 4 notes from Elizabeth's journal while Martha rests her eyes. Cole Marin leans against a pillar and watches swallows do small, honest work above the street. He keeps breathing on purpose. The gavel calls them back. Rutherford speaks without decoration. Probable cause stands on conspiracy. On racketeering under color of office. On attempted murder. On obstruction. Warrants to issue for the circle named. Sheriff Gage Thornton deceased and struck from the docket. Protective custody for principal witnesses until trial. Defense objects. Then objects again. The judge overrules like a man swatting flies. He has swatted since Summer learned his name. Dates are placed on the calendar. Ayanna understands a calendar can be a kind of weapon when the wrong hands hold it. Here it feels like a road that finally points forward. The hallway fills with voices and paper. A reporter with a foxtail on his chin asks for a quote. Ayanna gives him the straight line of her mouth. He will print a story anyway. Paper is always hungry. Harper gathers them in a small parlor before dusk. The room smells of cedar shavings and boiled coffee. He speaks plain. The circle will break. It will take work. He has requested a rail guard for the evidence trunk. He has requested extra men at the jail. He has spoken to a jailer who once took money the wrong way and now wants to take his own soul the right way. The man will keep the keys honest. Harper says he cannot promise quiet. He can promise steadiness. He tells Cole Marin that a man can serve the court and still choose a gate and a field when the court goes dark. He tells Ayanna that the land they left is waiting for voices that will speak to it without fear. He says the law can end a paragraph. It cannot plant a seed. That part is on them. Ayanna says she will go back to the oak's shadow and build a thing that does not need hiding. Cole Marin says fences are good, but doors are better. Doors let grace in on tired days. Harper's eyes show the kind of smile his mouth saves for later. Night comes soft. The guard posts double. A stone ticks against a window and bounces away. Someone tries the alley and meets a badge. The city decides it is too late to be wicked and goes to bed. Ayanna lies awake and feels the weight in her chest shift. It is still heavy. It is a kinder shape. She reads the transcript the reporter sent her as a courtesy. "You were heard," the woman wrote in a neat hand under the last line. Ayanna folds the page into her ribbon and closes her eyes. Morning brings a small mercy. Martha keeps broth down. Cole Marin's fever does not climb. Harper receives a note from the judge's clerk. Formal dates set. 2 weeks for the indictment to fatten. Then the trial. Then whatever comes after. Harper says they will remain in the city under guard until the papers are signed and the carriage is ready to take them home. Home is a word that means work more than rest, Ayanna thinks. Good. She is ready for work. The day turns hot. The clerk rechecks the inventory with a voice that would make a thief weep from boredom. 1 tin box. 1 ciphered list. 3 ledgers. 2 telegraph transcripts. 1 Colt with a sheriff's mark. Signatures stack where they should. Harper pockets the key and taps his coat once. Habit. Not worry. The afternoon opens a small window for a walk. They take it under escort. The river throws light back in their faces. A carpenter planes cedar on a stoop, and the scent cuts sweet through everything. A child chases a hoop. Laughter rings like a penny on a tabletop. Ayanna smiles without permission. That night Harper speaks one more time in the parlor. In a week we ride home, he says. The court will keep what it needs. You will keep what keeps you. The fire took a cabin. It did not take your voices. Let them carry farther than smoke. Ayanna writes 4 names on a scrap and tucks it into her bodice. Thomas, Elizabeth, Clara, Cole Marin. She writes 1 more word below. Mercy. She does not underline it. She does not need to. Outside, the city breathes like a barn after chores. Inside, sleep comes on quiet feet. Tomorrow will bring more paper and a few men with pockets that feel too light. It will bring a rumor or two and a sermon in a crowded room where guilt pretends to be outrage. It will bring work. Ayanna is ready. She turns on her side and watches the window fade from slate to ink. Somewhere, past roofs and wires and glinting water, the land waits. Fields that remember fire. Soil that still accepts seed. Ayanna whispers a promise to no one and to everyone. We will return. We will build. We will open a door. The court sets a trial date after the preliminary hearing. The verdict will take months to crawl through Austin, but Harper says their part is done. Ayanna signs her last statement. Cole Marin signs his. Martha leaves the courtroom with a slow pride that makes the soldiers step aside. The law will keep chewing. They can finally breathe. Harper shakes Cole Marin's hand once, hard, and says the words soldiers say when there are no better ones. You kept faith. He tells Ayanna to write if she ever needs help. She promises she will, though both of them know she never will. By sunset, they are on the road north. The wagons rattle out of the city's dust. The river gleams like a blade sliding back into its sheath. Austin shrinks behind them until only the smoke from its chimneys shows where the fight for paper justice still burns. Martha hums in the wagon bed, pale but steady. Cole Marin rides beside Ayanna. His arms still wrapped, his face turned toward the wind. Harper's column turns east at the fork, and the three of them keep north alone. For 2 days the ride is silent, except for hooves and the wheels complaining. The land greens as spring finds courage again. Rain falls once, thin and straight. They stop at a creek to boil coffee and mend a harness. Ayanna sits on a fallen log watching Cole Marin clean his pistol. He moves slow now, no urgency, just the habit of a man who once survived by rituals. You could lay it down, she says. Maybe one day, he answers. On the third day, the hills they know begin to rise ahead, low, worn, the same ones that hid the cabin's smoke months ago. Grass has grown over the ash. The road twists through a stand of oak that smells like rain and old wood smoke at the same time. The hollow waits below, stripped bare but alive with green shoots. Their horses pick a careful path. Cole Marin stops first. The wind moves his hat brim, his eyes wet but clear. You still want to rebuild? He asks. Ayanna nods. Not what burned. Something better. She steps down into the clearing. The soil is dark, soft under her boots. She kneels, presses her palm into it. The warmth surprises her. It's still alive, she says. It wants us back. Martha joins them, leaning on a stick. Fire clears the weeds, she says. It doesn't kill the root if the root has will. They laugh, quiet, the kind that shakes dust loose from grief. Cole Marin walks to the black scar where the porch once stood. He plants the staff in the ground like a marker. We start here, he says. They unload what little they carried. Tools, canvas, a tin of nails, a sack of seed corn Harper gave them as government evidence of kindness. Ayanna sets the tin box on a flat stone, not the original one, but one close enough. It holds no secrets now, just soot and silence. She opens it once more, looks at the inside burned silver, and sets a sprig of wild rosemary there. Then she closes it and buries it under the stone. That's for the dead, she says. The living get everything else. Days fold together. They build a lean-to first, then a roof, then walls from scavenged boards. The sun scalds their necks, but they keep swinging the hammer. The rhythm becomes prayer. At night they sit by the small fire, eat bread Martha bakes in an iron pot, and let silence do the talking. The fields around them thicken with shoots. Each morning, the green rises higher. One evening, Cole Marin finds her at the edge of the field, staring west. "You thinking of leaving?" he asks. "I'm thinking of staying," she says. "For once, that's harder." He smiles. "That's how you know it's right." He takes the shovel from her and drives it into the earth beside hers. 2 rows will go faster than 1. Summer presses in. Cicadas sing their endless sermon. Martha keeps chickens again, limping but laughing when the smallest one insists on roosting on her shoulder. Cole Marin fixes the porch rail so it doesn't wobble. Ayanna paints the new door blue, because blue holds the sky when the sky forgets. When the paint dries, she stands back and watches it catch the sun. At dusk, they sit on the steps and watch lightning far off in the east. The storm never reaches them. Cole Marin turns the coffee cup in his hands. "You know," he says, "Thomas once told me we are only caretakers. The land and the truth outlast us. We just keep them company a while." Ayanna nods. "Then let's be good company." A soft wind moves through the trees. Somewhere an owl calls. Martha hums from inside, an old hymn without words. The world smells of rain coming and wood still fresh cut. Cole Marin reaches for the small box Harper returned with the papers cleared and sealed again. Inside it now rests only a folded note in Ayanna's hand. "For records," the colonel had said. She takes it out and reads it by firelight. 4 names. Thomas, Elizabeth, Clara, Cole Marin, and 1 word beneath, Mercy. Cole Marin watches her read. "You still believe in that?" She looks up. "More than ever." He nods once. "Then maybe that's enough." They sit in silence until the first cool drops start to fall. Rain slides off the roof they built with their own hands. It hits the earth soft, forgiving. The ashes sink deeper. The scent is clean. Ayanna tilts her face up and lets it wash the dust from her lashes. The fire hisses, and she smiles. When morning comes, the world is new again. The porch rail gleams wet. Steam rises from the soil. In the distance, light spills over the ridge like water finding its way home. Cole Marin steps out, hat in hand, boots damp, and looks at the fields that wait for planting. Ayanna joins him. They stand side by side. The silence between them is not emptiness anymore. It's room. "Ready?" he asks. She nods. "Ready." They walk into the field. The earth gives easily under their feet. Behind them, the blue door catches the first gold of the sun. Ahead, rows of black soil wait like open pages. Ayanna presses the first seed into the ground. Cole Marin covers it. The wind moves over them, light and sure, carrying the faint scent of ash, but this time it smells like memory, not ruin.